I woke up that morning expecting very little, which is probably the saddest part. No grand gestures, no surprise party, not even a gift. I knew better than to hope for those things. But I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would remember. A card, a hug, a happy birthday over coffee. Something that would say, you matter, even just a little. That wasn't too much to expect from your own family, was it? The sun had barely stretched into the sky when I sat up in bed. The house was already moving without me. I could hear movement in the kitchen, clinks of glass, the low hum of voices, laughter. It was a familiar sound, but it didn't feel like it belonged to me. Not that morning. I pulled on my shirt, padded quietly down the hall, and stepped into the kitchen. Mira was already dressed, hair done, makeup light but polished, that familiar vanilla perfume floating around her like a soft warning. She stood near the island counter packing snacks into a cooler, protein bars, fruit slices, bottled water. "Morning," I said, my voice scratchy from sleep. She looked up briefly, then back down at the bags. "Morning. Coffee's fresh." No kiss. No smile. Not even a glance that held weight. I walked to the coffee maker in silence, poured a cup, and leaned against the sink. That's when I noticed the fishing rods lined up by the door. Coolers packed. Foldable chairs stacked like puzzle pieces. A bag of ice melting slowly in a bucket on the floor. Zara appeared from around the corner, brushing her thick curls into a ponytail. She didn't even see me at first. "Zara," I said. She paused, startled. "You're up early." "Oh, hey, Dad." "Yeah, Uncle Aaron's picking us up." "He's already on the way," she said quickly. "I need to find my hat." She disappeared again, and I stood there, coffee in hand, feeling like a stranger in my own house. Something in my chest tightened. I turned to Mira, trying to sound casual. "Fishing trips today?" She didn't even pause what she was doing. "Yeah, you know how Aaron is. Won't wait for anyone. We've been planning it for weeks." I nodded slowly. "Today's also my birthday." It came out calmly. No accusation, no expectation. Just a reminder, a statement of fact that shouldn't have been necessary. Mira stopped for half a second, looked at me with mild surprise, and then went right back to zipping up the cooler. "Oh, right. Happy birthday." She said it like a passing comment, like saying nice weather today. Then she added, "We'll celebrate later this week or something. Maybe order in." I wanted to ask why. Why it had to wait. Why my birthday was treated like an inconvenience they forgot to cancel. But I didn't ask. I didn't even flinch. I just sipped my coffee and let the bitterness settle on my tongue. Zara came bounding down the stairs again, pulling on her hoodie. "Uncle Aaron's here," she shouted, grabbing a bag and rushing toward the door. Mira followed behind her, pausing just long enough to lean in and kiss my cheek. Light, distant, like a favor to an acquaintance. "Don't wait up," she said with a half-smile. And then the door opened. Cool air drifted in. I watched my wife and daughter climb into the truck, laughing as Aaron honked the horn and shouted something about the best fishing spot being 2 hours away. Mira waved lazily through the window. Zara didn't look back at all. Then the door closed. Just like that. The house fell into a silence so heavy, I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. I stood there, still holding my coffee, staring at the spot where their shoes used to be, now empty. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't sad either, not the kind of sadness that breaks things. It was quieter than that. Numb. Familiar. I walked to the living room and sat in my usual chair. The same chair I sat in when Zara took her first steps. The one I fell asleep in when Mira was in labor. The one I repaired last fall after the leg cracked. I sat there and waited for the emotions to catch up to me, but they didn't come the way they used to. I looked at my phone. No messages. No calls. No reminders set on anyone's calendar, clearly. I took a sip of my coffee, now lukewarm, and let my eyes settle on the framed photos on the shelf. One from Zara's 12th birthday, her smiling with cake smeared on her face, Mira hugging her from behind, me in the background holding up a sparkler. Another photo from our anniversary trip years ago, when we could still hold hands without tension. All those captured smiles, they didn't feel like memories. They felt like someone else's life. I wasn't expecting a parade. I didn't need streamers or balloons. But what I did need, what I had quietly hoped for, was to matter. Just for a day. One day a year. Instead, I was left with an empty chair, a cup of coffee, and the realization that the people I loved most had chosen someone else's plans over celebrating mine. I stared out the window, watching a single bird land on the porch railing. It hopped twice and flew off again. That morning I had woken up hoping for something small. But now, what I had was even smaller than that. Less than small. It was invisible, forgotten, and it wasn't the kind of thing I could ask to be fixed. Because asking to be remembered, that's not something you should have to do. So I didn't call. I didn't send a reminder text. I didn't beg for attention or cry in the bedroom. I sat in my chair, feeling the shape of the absence they left behind, and made a quiet promise to myself. If they didn't want to remember me, then fine. But I'd make damn sure they never forgot what they missed. I didn't move much that day. After the door closed behind them, I just sat there, letting time pass like rain on a windshield. You don't stop it. You don't chase it. You just watch it fall. The clock ticked, the coffee cooled, and I stayed in that same chair long enough for the shadows in the room to shift from morning light to the gray tint of late afternoon. But I wasn't stuck. No, not this time. Something inside me had begun to shift, not out of anger, not even out of sadness, but from a quiet, steady realization. I'm done begging to be seen. I had spent too many years giving, showing up, helping, fixing, covering, forgiving. I wasn't keeping score, but still, deep down, you expect something back. You hope that if you love consistently, they'll love you just as steadily in return. But love that has to be reminded to show up isn't love. It's convenience. And on my birthday, I learned exactly where I ranked in their lives, somewhere beneath bait, fishing rods, and my brother's weekend plans. I walked outside and sat on the back porch with a second cup of coffee, this time intentionally letting it go cold. The wind rustled through the old oak tree, shaking a few early brown leaves loose. Fall was coming. A quiet season. A season that matched what I felt, bare, reflective, and ready for change. Across the yard, the neighbor's boy was throwing a tennis ball to their dog. He waved at me. I waved back. It hit me then. I had never once been too busy for a moment like that. Not for my daughter, not for my wife. I was the kind of man who stopped mid-project to help with homework, who paused late-night work to talk about dreams or fix a broken charger or drive across town because someone forgot their textbook. I'd made myself available for everyone, except myself. And now, I was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind of tired that sits in your bones. That whispers no more. That nudges you to do something different, something bold. But bold didn't mean loud. I wasn't going to scream or slam doors. No, that's not my way. I was going to do something more effective. I was going to show them. I stood up slowly, joints popping from the long sit, and went back inside. The house was still quiet. Their absence clung to the walls like dust you can't see until sunlight hits it just right. I glanced at the fridge where old magnets held up expired coupons and a chore list no one followed anymore. In the middle of it all was a photo from 3 years ago, Zara's 16th birthday party. She had wanted a 90s theme. I built a mini dance floor in the garage, strung up colored lights, even borrowed an old boombox from a coworker. Mira laughed that night, genuinely. Zara said it was the coolest party ever. They used to celebrate. But somewhere along the way, I'd become the one-man support team. No cake. No decorations. Not even a dinner reservation. Not anymore. I opened a drawer, pulled out a yellow notepad, and wrote 3 simple words. It stops here. Not the marriage, not the relationship with my daughter, but the invisible version of me. The version that only existed when there was something to fix, money to be sent, chores to be done. That version was gone. Later that evening, when the house still remained empty, I ordered takeout, just for me. Thai noodles and mango sticky rice, because I like them. No one ever wanted it when I suggested it, but that night wasn't about anyone else. I sat at the table alone and didn't feel sorry for myself. I felt clear. There's power in silence when you stop resisting it. It becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, I saw a man who had been worn thin, not from neglect, but from loving people who had forgotten how to love him back. I wasn't going to lecture them. I wasn't going to make speeches or send dramatic texts. I'd done the emotional labor of keeping this family warm. Now, they could learn what the cold felt like. The next morning, I woke up early, earlier than I needed to. Made coffee again, but this time, I sat with a pen and started thinking. Not sulking, planning. What if I celebrated myself? What if, instead of waiting for them to come around, I did something for me? Something simple. Something bold. I thought about who in my life had truly shown up for me, not out of obligation, but with heart. A name came to mind. Harold. My older cousin. He was once a chef before retiring to the countryside. We hadn't spoken in a while, but he always remembered my birthday, except maybe this one. I picked up the phone and called him. Jules. His voice boomed like it always had. You still breathing, man? Breathing, but a little lighter than I was yesterday. He chuckled. You sound like you just hit some kind of truth. Something like that, I said. Listen, I want to throw something small this weekend. Not a party. Just something that reminds me I still exist. Would you come? There was no pause. Say when and what to bring. I'll cook. That was the first domino. Next, I called Nia. She was a local musician, half soul, half jazz, all heart. Years ago, she was struggling to pay tuition at the community college. I'd met her at a coffee shop and ended up covering one of her semesters after hearing her play guitar for tips. We'd kept in touch. Not closely, but enough. When I asked if she'd be willing to play a few songs in the backyard, she said, for you. I'll bring the whole damn band. Then Corey. He was 15 when I met him. A neighborhood kid with no father figure. I gave him odd jobs, taught him to change a tire, balance a checkbook. He once said, "You're the reason I didn't give up." Now he had a wife and a baby of his own. When I called, he didn't even let me finish. Tell me what to wear, he said. We'll be there. That day felt different. My feet were light. My chest didn't carry the same weight. I didn't need a crowd. I just needed truth. I needed presence. And this time, I was choosing who I let into my space. No more fishing trips where I'm the forgotten name. No more watching my daughter celebrate everyone but me. No more pretending. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. By the time Mira and Zara got back that evening, I had already printed a simple invitation and slid it under the fridge magnet. This Sunday. Backyard. Food, music, laughter. Bring only love. Mira glanced at it, read it, and smiled faintly. Oh, whose event is that? I looked her in the eyes for the first time in days. Mine. Then I walked away. The house felt oddly cooperative that week. Mira didn't question the invitation on the fridge. Zara barely looked in my direction. I wasn't surprised. It had always been like this. The moment I stopped talking, they stopped noticing. That used to bother me. Used to dig somewhere deep in my ribs and settle like a dull ache. But now? Now I felt something else entirely. Focus. Control. I had been invisible in this house for so long that when I finally started making quiet plans, no one even blinked. And that was perfect. I wasn't planning a spectacle. I wasn't trying to prove a point. This wasn't about fireworks and revenge. This was about presence. Reclaiming it. For once, doing something just for me without waiting for permission, without checking if it fit into anyone else's schedule. I was done living like a placeholder. Tuesday morning, after they left, Mira to her job at the architecture firm, Zara to her final year of high school, I cleared the living room, pushed the couch to the side, rolled up the rug, and dusted off the boxes I hadn't touched since I thought dreams were still allowed. In the back of the hall closet, I found the old camera gear, tripod, lenses, a Canon I hadn't touched since Zara was 12. I used to take pictures for fun. Portraits, landscapes, little moments that felt like they deserved to live forever. But somewhere in the shuffle of bills, breakdowns, and busy lives, that part of me got shelved. Not this time. I tested the battery. Still charged. I plugged in the SD card, pointed it toward the open backyard door, and hit record. I wanted this Sunday to be more than a gathering. I wanted it to live on in color, and sound, and memory. I was tired of the important things in my life disappearing without proof they ever mattered. Next came the phone calls. I called Harold again, this time to ask if he could bring his signature jerk chicken and maybe, if he wasn't too busy, the potato salad that had ruined family cookouts for every other aunt and uncle. He laughed. I'll bring both. Might even wear that ridiculous chef's hat, too. I smiled. Do that. It always made you look 10 pounds wiser. He chuckled. Jules, I haven't cooked for a man who actually deserves it in years. You better wear something nice. Then Nia. Acoustic or full amp? She asked when I told her about the backyard. Just the guitar, I said. Keep it soft. Keep it simple. You sure? I got a drummer who owes me a favor. I paused. Bring him. Let's make some noise after all. The last call I made that day was to Corey. Bring the baby? He asked. Only if she's in the mood to smile. She always is. There was something comforting about those 3 calls. Not just because they said yes, but because none of them asked why. They didn't need to. These were the kind of people who had watched me go quiet over the years. They'd noticed when I started fading out of my own celebrations. Maybe they didn't say anything then, but they were saying something now. Loud and clear. By Thursday, I had borrowed a few folding chairs from the community center and dug out the old string lights from the garage. I cleaned the grill, swept the back deck, and trimmed the wild edges of the lawn with a kind of energy I hadn't felt in years. I didn't tell Mira a thing. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't know her the details. If she noticed me dragging chairs and scrubbing the patio, she didn't say a word. If she heard me humming while I tested the speaker system, she didn't ask what was coming. Maybe she didn't care. Or maybe, deep down, she assumed it had nothing to do with her. I didn't correct her. Friday night, Zara asked if she could borrow my car on Sunday. I looked at her calmly. Not Sunday. She furrowed her brow. Why not? Because I'm hosting something that day, I replied. Oh, she said. Is it, like a barbecue? Something like that. She paused. Should I tell Mom? If you want. She nodded but didn't ask to join. And I didn't invite her. Not out of pettiness, but because real invitations are built on presence. If you haven't been present, you don't get a front row seat. Saturday, I stayed quiet again. Focused. I tested the camera angles. Practiced with the lighting. Harold texted to say he'd be bringing a few friends who remembered me from back in the day. People who asked about you, he wrote. That meant more than I could explain. Nia confirmed her time slot. Corey sent a photo of the baby smiling in a pink sun hat with the message, ready for showtime. I don't remember the last time I smiled that hard reading a text. By sundown, I had printed a simple chalkboard sign for the yard. Today is a good day. No hashtags. No balloons. Just truth. As I stood in the backyard, watching the final colors of sunset drip over the fence line, I took a long breath. A still one. I realized something. This wasn't just a gathering. This was the first time in years I had built something with no audience in mind except myself. Not to impress Mira. Not to win Zara over. Just me. I thought about all the birthdays I had celebrated for them. The scavenger hunts, the handmade cards, the surprise trips, the emergency cake runs at 10 p.m. because chocolate frosting was a must. I thought about the years I gave and never kept track until now. Until I saw the return on investment. And it was silence. This Sunday, I wasn't looking for payback. I was reclaiming the kind of joy that didn't need witnesses to feel real. That night, while Mira watched a movie in the bedroom and Zara scrolled through her phone in the living room, I stepped outside to the porch again. Just me and the lights I'd hung. The faint buzz of summer's end in the air. I imagined the sound of laughter, the clink of glasses, the soft strum of guitar. I smiled to myself. They had chosen to leave me behind on the day I was born, and that told me everything I needed to know about how small I had allowed myself to become in their world. But come Sunday, I wasn't going to be small anymore. I was going to remind myself, quietly, gently, fully, that I was never the problem. I had just been too patient with the wrong kind of silence. Sunday arrived with a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. The kind that wraps around your morning and whispers, today will be different. I woke up early, earlier than usual, and not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There was no panic, no list of errands, no one rushing me out of the way to get to their plans. Just me, the open space of the backyard, and the promise of something real. I stepped outside barefoot, the grass still wet with dew. The string lights I'd hung 2 days earlier were gently swaying in the breeze. The chairs were already arranged in a half-moon under the oak tree, and the grill stood cleaned and ready, like it knew its moment had come. Everything was quiet, but not empty. It was the kind of quiet that holds its breath before the joy arrives. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard as the sun broke through the horizon. That morning, Mira didn't ask what I was doing. She barely looked up from her phone. Zara was still in bed. I didn't bother them. This wasn't their story today. Around 11, Harold's old pickup truck pulled into the driveway. He got out wearing a red apron, a wide straw hat, and a grin that could break tension in any room. You ready, birthday boy? He called out as he slammed the tailgate. I walked outside with a smile and hugged him tight. I've been ready for years. He popped open the back of his truck and started unloading trays of seasoned meat, tubs of homemade salad, and a cooler that had to weigh more than both of us combined. I brought extra. You never know when good food attracts a few extra folks. Soon after, Nia arrived in a rusted blue hatchback, carrying her guitar in one hand and a speaker in the other. She wore a denim jacket covered in patches and a beaming smile. Tell me where to plug in, she said. And tell me who needs to cry first, 'cause I got some songs that'll break hearts in all the best ways. We laughed as she sat up beneath the oak tree. She tuned her strings, tested her mic, and started softly playing while Harold lit the grill. The scent of jerk chicken started curling through the air like a warm invitation. Then Corey showed up, his wife in a sundress, their baby wrapped snug against her chest. He looked around the yard with a slow, thoughtful smile. "Man," he said, shaking my hand. "This feels good. It feels like something." I nodded. "It is." Within the hour, more people showed up, faces from different parts of my life. A coworker I hadn't seen in a decade. A neighbor who once called me, the guy who helps everyone and asks nothing. Even my barber, Dean, came by with his teenage son and a bottle of apple cider. Every one of them brought something: food, drinks, old stories. But more than that, they brought presents. And that's what made it beautiful. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. There were no bouncing castles or Instagram backdrops or theme napkins. Just conversation, connection, and warmth. Music filled the background as laughter rose in pockets across the yard. People passed plates. Children played with bubbles. Someone's toddler tried to hug my leg and then waddled away. Harold handed me a paper plate stacked with food and said, "You know what this is? This is love made visible." He was right, because for the first time in what felt like forever, I was surrounded by people who weren't there for obligation or status or appearances. They were there because they wanted to be. At some point in the afternoon, Nia stood in the center of the yard with her guitar and said, "I'm dedicating this one to Jules, the man who doesn't just give quietly, but listens loud." She played an old Sam Cooke song, "A Change Is Gonna Come." The moment her voice hit that first note, I closed my eyes. I let the sun kiss my face, and I felt something shift inside me. Not sadness, not nostalgia, peace. For those 3 minutes, I wasn't a forgotten husband. I wasn't an ignored father. I wasn't a man waiting to be acknowledged. I was just alive. After the song, Corey raised a toast with a red plastic cup. To Jules, the man who never missed a moment, even when people stopped noticing. Everyone raised their cups and echoed, "To Jules." I blinked quickly to clear the tears threatening to fall. But I didn't hide them. I let them sit there, proof that I was still capable of being moved, still capable of feeling. Throughout the day, I moved slowly, intentionally. I checked on everyone. I laughed. I took photos. I captured hugs, danced steps, and even the baby's quiet nap under the tree. The camera clicked steadily, as if it, too, wanted to remember what real joy looked like. Later in the afternoon, I noticed something. Myra's car was gone. Zara wasn't home either. I hadn't heard a word from either of them all day. Not a message. Not a call. Not even a look from the window. Maybe they didn't want to be around all this. Maybe they were too busy. Or maybe, just maybe, they thought I wouldn't go through with it. But I had. And that made all the difference. Because this day wasn't about who didn't show up. It was about who did. As dusk settled in, people began to leave, one by one. Each goodbye came with a hug, a thank you, a "don't wait so long next time." They left behind plates scraped clean, footprints in the grass, and memories that refused to fade. Nia packed up her guitar and kissed my cheek. "Next year, same time?" I nodded. "Every year from now on." Harold slapped my back. "You ever forget who you are, you call me. I'll remind you." Corey lingered last. He looked around at the now quiet yard and said, "You're not alone, Jules. You never were. But sometimes we all need a day like this to remember." After they left, I stood alone in the backyard, looking up at the sky. The string lights buzzed gently above me. The grill was cold. The chairs were empty, but my heart wasn't. And as I turned to go inside, I glanced at the camera one last time. The red light was still blinking, recording every second of a day my wife and daughter had chosen to miss. A day filled with real laughter, real love, real presence. A day I would never let them forget. That night, after the last guest left and the stars began to scatter across the sky, I stood at the kitchen sink rinsing off serving spoons still warm with the scent of Harold's cooking. My hands moved slowly, deliberately. I wasn't rushing. There was no tension in my shoulders, no tightness behind my eyes. Just the quiet after a day that reminded me what being seen truly felt like. The string lights still twinkled outside through the kitchen window, casting little reflections against the glass like echoes of the laughter that had filled the yard only hours before. I smiled without forcing it. For once, it didn't feel like I was carrying everyone else's happiness on my back. I looked around the kitchen, the same space that had felt cold and dismissive just a week earlier. It felt different now. Not because anyone had done anything, but because I had. I dried my hands, walked to the living room, and dropped gently into the couch, camera in hand. I scrolled through the videos I'd captured throughout the day. Faces frozen mid-laugh. Hugs caught in motion. The moment Nia sang and everyone went quiet. A short clip of Corey's baby giggling when someone blew bubbles. All of it felt sacred. Not because it was loud or perfect, but because it was honest. And then the thought hit me, they missed all of this. Not just the food. Not just the music. They missed me. The real me. The one who laughed freely. The one who wasn't adjusting himself to fit into a shrinking box of convenience. They had missed the version of me that came alive when I was finally surrounded by people who gave, not out of duty, but out of love. It wasn't anger that settled into my chest. It was clarity. They chose not to ask how my birthday went. They didn't peek into the backyard once, even with music floating through the air. Not even curiosity brought them out. And in that silence, I realized something deeper than disappointment. I realized I wasn't invisible. I was ignored. That was a different kind of ache. I checked my phone, still no texts. No missed calls. Just a photo Mira had posted earlier that day. It was from the fishing trip the weekend before. A group picture, all smiles. And in the caption, just 5 words. Best weekend ever. #family. It wasn't the words that hit hardest. It was the casualness. The unbothered confidence of someone who didn't think twice about what they left behind. I clicked through to Zara's page. She'd posted nothing. Nothing about me. Nothing about the day. Just a story from that morning showing her matcha latte with a lazy Sunday sticker slapped across the screen. And that's when I knew. There wasn't going to be a conversation. Not from them. They'd forgotten my birthday. Not because they were too busy, but because I had become so habitual in their lives that they assumed I'd just take it. That I'd absorb the hurt and smile like I always did. I had trained them to treat me this way. And I was done. So I got to work. The footage wasn't just for memory anymore. It was for message. I opened my laptop and began sorting through the clips. I edited out the parts where people were adjusting the camera or fixing their hair. I focused on the moments that mattered. I found the second Nia's voice cracked slightly during the Sam Cooke song and zoomed in on my closed eyes. I clipped Corey's toast and matched it with a photo of him and his daughter hugging me. I placed Harold's laugh right after a shot of him cooking on the grill. And the sound of gentle clapping when I blew out a candle someone stuck into a store-bought cupcake. It wasn't a cinematic masterpiece, but it was real. And more than anything, it was mine. I worked on it late into the night, my face dimly lit by the screen as I added the final text slide. This was the happiest I've felt in years. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. You weren't there. Not because you couldn't be, but because you chose not to be. I hope your weekend was worth what you missed. After I rendered the video, I selected stills from it. Harold serving a plate, Nia laughing under the tree, Corey's baby holding my finger, and I printed them. I placed them carefully into a photo album. Each image, a small truth. Each smile, a quiet reminder. I left the last page blank except for a handwritten message. Sometimes people need to see what love looks like when it isn't forced. This is what you missed. Not a party. Not food. Me. I packaged the USB with the photo album, wrapped it neatly in matte black paper, and tied it with a simple gold ribbon. There was no anger in the way I folded the corners. No bitterness in the way I tied the bow. Only purpose. I placed the package on the kitchen counter, the same counter Mira had once filled with surprise cakes for Zara, handmade cards for her mother, wine glasses for dinner guests. This time, it held something she couldn't ignore. I stood there for a moment after setting it down. This wasn't about payback. This was about clarity. Proof. A mirror held up to a house that had stopped reflecting me long ago. I turned off the lights, went to bed, and slept better than I had in months. No dreams. No tossing. Just peace. The next morning, I woke early again. Made coffee. Watched the sun stretch across the living room rug. Mira came downstairs first, her heels clicking softly against the floor as she moved toward the fridge. She paused when she saw the package. She didn't say anything. She just looked at it. She read the label, her name and Zara's, handwritten in black ink. She held it for a long time, then set it down again. Didn't open it. Didn't ask. Later that morning, Zara came down and saw it too. Her brows furrowed. She picked it up, looked at me, and asked, "What's this?" "You'll see," I said, calmly. She set it next to her cereal bowl. And that was it. They didn't open it that day, but I knew they would. Because curiosity has a way of creeping into silence, especially the kind born out of guilt. That night, as I sat out back again, watching the lights blink across the fence, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt free. I had stopped waiting for their permission to feel seen, and they were about to see what that looked like. The package sat on the counter for 2 days. Untouched, unopened, untalked about. Each morning, I'd pass it on my way to the kettle. Gold ribbon still perfectly tied, matte black paper without a wrinkle. Like a question left hanging in the air, waiting for someone to care enough to answer it. Mira walked past it every time she made her coffee, as if it wasn't there. Zara looked at it once, twice, even paused once like she might unwrap it, but then didn't. It was the kind of silence that screams. But I stayed still, said nothing. I wasn't going to push. That was the point. They needed to want to know. They needed to choose curiosity, choose to face what they missed. By Wednesday evening, I started editing again, not out of spite, but because something in me wanted to preserve more of that day. I added captions, titled the video, "What You Missed." I wasn't planning to post it anywhere. This wasn't for the world. It was personal. A time capsule of something they'd thrown away like an old grocery list. At one point, I looked at the photo album again, flipping through the pages slowly. Each image whispered something, not just what I'd felt, but what they failed to feel. Zara's first birthday? I stayed up until 3 a.m. making decorations by hand because the party planner canceled last minute. Myra's promotion dinner? I spent half my paycheck on a private chef and rented linens. I've celebrated every milestone with my full heart. But mine? Apparently, mine was just optional. And so, that package became more than just a memory. It was a message wrapped in gold ribbon. On Thursday evening, I came home from the gym and saw the package was gone. It had finally moved. I didn't ask where it was. Didn't search. If they were ready, they were ready. If not, it wasn't my job to help them open their eyes. But something was different in the air. I could feel it the moment I stepped through the door. Zara was in the living room, quiet, curled up on the couch with a blanket she usually kept folded in her room. No phone in hand, no music playing in her earbuds. Just stillness. Mira was in the kitchen, rinsing out a wine glass. No hum under her breath like usual. Her movements slower, more careful. She didn't say anything when I walked in. Just glanced at me and looked away. I went upstairs. Changed. Took a shower. By the time I came back down, the photo album was sitting on the dining table. Unwrapped. Opened. Face up on the last page. My message written in plain ink on cream paper. You missed more than a birthday. You missed proof of how I am loved, not for what I give, but for who I am. The room smelled faintly of the candle Mira always lit when she needed to relax. But it didn't smell warm. It smelled like guilt. I didn't say anything. Just walked to the fridge, poured a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. Zara was watching me now. Not intensely, not defensively. Just watching. She finally spoke. I didn't think it mattered that much, she said. Her voice was soft, like someone who realized too late that their words had consequences. I sipped my water. It didn't matter to you. That's different. She blinked and looked down. I guess I didn't think. I don't know. You've never made a big deal about your birthday. I nodded, because I didn't want to have to ask to be remembered. The silence that followed was thick. Mira stepped in then, towel in hand. She dried her palm slowly, as if trying to buy time. I can't lie, she said, not looking directly at me. That video, it hurt to watch. I raised an eyebrow. Good. Her head turned then. Not in anger. Just surprise. I didn't make it to hurt you, I added. But I'm glad it did hurt. Because maybe now you understand how it felt to sit here alone. To be so easily dismissed that my own birthday didn't even register as worth staying home for. Mira sat down at the dining table, her hands resting near the photo album but not touching it. I thought the fishing trip was just a tradition, she said. Something harmless. It's not about fish, I said. It's about priority. That truck drove away with my family in it, laughing. On my birthday. And I sat here, wondering how I became the man no one remembered. Zara whispered, I'm sorry, Dad. Her eyes were wet now, blinking fast like she didn't want me to see them shimmer. But I saw, and I believed her. Still, I didn't rush toward forgiveness. That's not how healing works. I'm not angry anymore, I said. But I'm not the same either. Mira looked up. What do you mean? I mean I stopped waiting. Waiting to be noticed. Waiting to be loved out loud. I've been walking on eggshells in this house, trying not to make anyone uncomfortable, while shrinking smaller and smaller. That ends now. Zara looked down again. Mira sighed. Is this the part where you leave us? I laughed. Not bitterly. Just briefly. I'm not leaving. But I'm not begging either. I turned to Zara. You're almost an adult now. Old enough to know that love isn't just something you feel. It's something you show. She nodded slowly. I get it now. Good, I said. Because that day in the backyard? That wasn't just a party. That was a mirror. A reflection of what love looks like when people choose you. I took the photo album and placed it back in its wrapping, careful and quiet. Then I looked at both of them. You two chose to miss that. And I'm not going to forget it overnight. You shouldn't either. They said nothing. They didn't have to. Their faces, especially Zara's, said everything. That night, I went to bed early. No long talks. No dramatic music swelling in the background. Just a quiet understanding in the air. They had finally opened the package. And now, they had to live with what was inside. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because they needed to feel the absence I'd felt all year condensed into one unforgettable day. The days that followed were strange, not in an obvious, dramatic way, but in the quiet, awkward shuffle of people trying to undo something that couldn't be undone. Zara wasn't as loud as usual. The music that used to leak from under her door disappeared. She'd pass by me in the hallway and hesitate, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I let her have her silence. Let her sit with it. I had no interest in forcing her to speak. Mira, on the other hand, tried to carry on as if things were normal. She still packed her lunch in the mornings, still kissed me on the cheek before heading to work, but there was hesitation now. Her kiss didn't land the way it used to. It hovered, like she wasn't sure she still had permission. That was the thing no one told you about distance. It didn't always announce itself with doors slamming or voices raised. Sometimes it came in the form of a quiet cup placed gently on a table. A missed question. An avoided gaze. That Wednesday evening, Mira came home with grocery bags. Inside were my favorite things, stuff she hadn't bought in months. The same brand of coffee I always mentioned but never requested. That mango yogurt I used to eat every morning before they started buying low-fat vanilla because it was healthier. Small things, but noticeable. She placed them gently on the counter and lingered a moment. I figured, you might want these, she said softly. I nodded. Thanks. That was it. No apology. No long explanation. Just a gesture. The next night, Zara knocked on my door. Not burst in. Not shouted from the stairs. She knocked. Hey, she said when I opened. Can I come in? I stepped aside and let her. She stood awkwardly near the window, picking at the hem of her hoodie. I read your note again, she began. The one in the album. I waited. I didn't realize you felt that way, she said. Like we didn't see you. I looked at her. Because you didn't. She nodded. I know. And I think I was just used to you being there. Always. For everything. I didn't even think about how it felt from your side. Her voice cracked at the end, like it surprised even her. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. That's what I'd always done. But when I watched the video, she continued, it hit me. Watching other people say things I should have said. Seeing how happy you looked. Like you didn't miss us at all. That's not true, I said. I did miss you. I just didn't wait around for you to show up. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm sorry, Dad. I stood for a moment, unsure of how much to give. Then I stepped forward and pulled her into a hug. Her shoulders shook as she cried into my shirt. I'm so sorry, she whispered again. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. But I held her. Forgiveness isn't a light switch, it's a slow sunrise. And in that moment, the first rays began to show. The next day, Mira set the table for dinner. She hadn't done that in a while. Usually, we ate on separate schedules. Zara in front of the TV, Mira at her desk, me somewhere between cleaning up and answering work emails. But that evening, she lit a small candle and placed plates in. Halfway through the meal, Mira cleared her throat. I don't know how to fix what we did, she said quietly. I don't even know if it's fixable. But I need you to know, I saw you in that video. Really saw you. And I didn't like what I saw in myself. I met her gaze. Then don't unsee it. She nodded slowly. I won't. We didn't finish our wine. We didn't hold hands across the table. There was no cinematic closure. Just honesty. And honesty was enough. That night, I walked past Zara's room. Her door was open. She was lying on her bed, a notebook in her lap. Good night, Dad, she said before I could speak. Good night, I replied. The next morning, there was a card on my nightstand. Handwritten. Dear Dad. I know this is late. Really late. But I still wanted to say it. Happy birthday. You mean more to me than I ever said out loud. I love you. Zara. I ran my hand over the ink like it might smudge if I held on too long. I folded it neatly and placed it inside the photo album, right next to the last page. Late love is still love. That weekend, I was in the garage fixing an old shelf when Mira came in. She watched me for a while before speaking. Do you want to talk? About us. I paused, set down the drill, and wiped my hands on a rag. I think we've said enough for now, I said. What matters is what happens next. She nodded. I'd like to rebuild. If you're willing. I thought about it. About the years of small slights, quiet disappointments, the growing gap that started as a hairline crack and widened with every unspoken feeling. I'm not interested in rebuilding the same house, I said. But maybe we can build something better. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. And she understood that. The days that followed were softer. Not perfect, but softer. She didn't force closeness. Zara didn't try to erase what had happened. Instead, they showed up in the little things. Zara washed the dishes without being asked. Mira left sticky notes on the fridge with little reminders. Don't forget your coffee. You matter. I didn't respond to each gesture, but I noticed them. That was the point, after all. Not every reaction needed words. Some reactions were quiet, but deep, lasting. They had opened the package. Now they were learning to live with what it revealed. And though the wound was still healing, I no longer felt like a man screaming into a void. I was a man being heard. And that made all the difference. Guilt has a strange smell. It doesn't arrive like smoke or sweat. It seeps into a room like warm air after a storm. You can't always see it. You don't hear it coming. But it wraps around you, lingers in the corners, makes the air just a little harder to breathe. That's what the house felt like in the weeks that followed. Mira tried, in her own way, to make things right. Not loudly, not dramatically, but through gestures. A warm meal left out when I got home late, folded laundry I hadn't asked for, lingering looks that tried to speak on her behalf. But I didn't rush toward those offerings. I didn't respond with old habits. Something in me had shifted permanently. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even distant. I was simply no longer chasing a place at the table that should have always been mine. One night, a Thursday, she came home with a cake. No special occasion. Just a plain chocolate cake in a white box. I know it's not your birthday anymore, she said, setting it gently on the counter, but I never got you one. So, her voice trailed off. I looked at it, round, small, neatly iced. No candles, no inscription, just cake. I appreciate it, I said. She nodded. Would you like a slice? I'm not really in the mood for sweets, I answered. She stood there a moment longer, then carefully closed the box again. She wasn't hurt, not outwardly, but her eyes gave something away. A flicker of recognition. This is what it feels like to be unseen. Not maliciously. Just softly forgotten. Like dust settling on something you didn't even realize you cared about until it's too late. Zara, too, started acting differently. More present. More cautious. She'd check in with me at odd times. When I was mowing the lawn. When I came home from the store. Even once while I was fixing the garage light. You okay, Dad? She'd ask. Yeah, I'd say. Why? No reason. Just checking. I never told her to stop asking. But I didn't always answer either. Some questions weren't meant to be answered out loud. Sometimes people need to sit with what they did and let the silence do its work. I could see the guilt working its way through both of them, each trying to repay a debt that couldn't be measured in favors or desserts. But I didn't want repayment. I wanted recognition. And not the quick kind. The lasting kind. The kind that changes how someone looks at you, even when you're not speaking. One Saturday morning, Mira sat beside me on the porch. She didn't bring a book. Didn't bring her phone. Just a cup of tea and a quiet presence. I've been thinking, she said after a long stretch of silence. I waited. I used to tell my friends how lucky I was. That I had a husband who didn't complain. A man who didn't ask for much. Who let me be independent. I wore it like a badge. I raised an eyebrow. You mean, I made your life easier? She sighed. Yeah, I did. But I never asked if that was making your life any better. We sat in silence for a few moments. It's easy to praise someone who stays quiet, I said finally. It takes more to ask why they had to. She didn't argue. Didn't flinch. I thought I was being a good wife, she continued. Holding the house together, raising our daughter, working, keeping things steady. But I confused survival with connection. I assumed that if you weren't yelling or leaving, then everything was fine. I looked out across the lawn, the sun beginning to stretch its arms across the grass. You know what hurts more than being yelled at? I asked. What? Being overlooked. It's a quieter kind of pain, but it lingers longer. She nodded. I feel like I looked up one day and realized you weren't standing next to me, I said. You were standing ahead of me, with your priorities, your routines, your celebrations. And I was just somewhere behind, waiting to be remembered. Myra's voice cracked then. Just a little. I remember now. I know, I said. But memory isn't magic. It doesn't undo anything. It just gives you a chance to choose better next time. She placed her cup on the rail. I want to do better. I know, I said again. But I'm not rushing to believe it. And I meant that. Not cruelly. Not in punishment. But because forgiveness, real forgiveness, takes time. And I had rushed so many parts of my life trying to keep everyone comfortable. I wasn't doing that anymore. Later that week, Zara came into the living room holding her laptop. Can I show you something? She asked. I set my book down. Sure. She sat beside me, opened the screen, and pressed play. A slideshow began. Photos of us from over the years. Ones I had forgotten even existed. Me holding her in the hospital. A camping trip from when she was 8. Her science fair when she lost and still smiled. At the end of the video, a black screen with white text appeared. I've always been proud to be your daughter. I just forgot to say it out loud. I'm sorry I made you feel small. You've always been the biggest part of who I am. I turned to her. Her eyes were glassy, her mouth trembling. You didn't have to make this, I said softly. I know, she whispered. But I needed to. We sat together for a while. Not crying. Just breathing. The guilt in the house had settled into something softer now. Less of a fog, more of a blanket. Not weighing us down, but covering what had been exposed. It would take time. Maybe a lot of time. But something had changed. I no longer felt like I had to prove I mattered. They had seen it, felt it, missed it. And now, they were learning how not to miss it again. It didn't happen all at once, the shift in me. There wasn't some lightning bolt or single moment where I suddenly declared, I'm different now. No. It crept in slowly, quietly, like a tide that rises while your back is turned. One day, I simply stopped waiting for the house to feel like home. And I started creating one somewhere else. Not physically. I still lived under the same roof, slept in the same bed, ate at the same kitchen table, but my spirit had moved. It began with small things. I started waking up earlier than I needed to, not out of anxiety, but out of choice. I'd take a walk through the neighborhood before the world fully woke. No phone, no noise, just me and my footsteps on the sidewalk. It was like pressing reset on a life I'd once let drift too far from the shoreline. Then came the gym. I reactivated my membership. Not because I wanted abs or biceps or any of that. I just wanted to feel strong again. To remind myself that my body wasn't just a machine for carrying groceries or assembling furniture. I was more than what I gave others. I was someone worth investing in, even if I was the only one doing the investing. The next thing I did? I reconnected with the local rec center. I used to volunteer there years ago, teaching financial literacy workshops to kids and young adults. Back then, I thought I was just helping out. But the truth was, I was building something. A sense of purpose. A quiet corner of the world where I was seen. And that's where I returned. First, it was once a week. Then twice. Before I knew it, I was back every Saturday morning, whiteboard in hand, explaining budgeting and credit scores to high school seniors who reminded me of myself at that age, curious, nervous, searching. They listened to me. They asked questions. They called me Mr. Jules, even though I told them they didn't have to. One kid, Leon, stayed behind after class one day. You really like this, huh? He asked, stuffing papers into his backpack. Yeah, I said. I do. You talk like it matters. Like we matter. You do, I told him. He looked down, then smiled. Thanks. That smile stuck with me for days. It was the kind of expression I used to wait for from my daughter. The kind that says, I see you. I hear you. You made a difference. Funny thing is, I wasn't chasing that anymore, not from Zara, not from Mira. And maybe that's why the shift was happening so naturally. Because for the first time, I wasn't doing things to be noticed. I was doing them because they made me feel alive. Nia invited me to another open mic night. I almost said no out of habit, but I stopped myself. I put on a clean button-up, sprayed some cologne I hadn't used in years, and showed up. The bar was small, intimate. Exposed brick walls, low lighting, a little stage near the corner. Nia sang with her whole soul, and for the first time in a long time, I clapped not out of obligation, but because I felt something move inside me. When she finished, she walked over and hugged me. You glow different now, she said with a smile. Do I? Yeah. You used to look like you were trying not to disappear. Now you look like someone who knows who he is. That hit harder than I expected. I left that night feeling taller. And then there was Corey. We kept in touch more frequently now. He called just to check in, sometimes asking for advice about home repairs or fatherhood. Other times, he'd say nothing much at all. Just hey, how's your day? One Sunday, I helped him paint his garage. His baby daughter watched from her playpen while we rolled paint and talked about life. You ever think maybe these little things, is what it's all about? He asked, paint smudged across his cheek. I do now, I said. And I meant it. Because while the house I lived in still carried the weight of guilt and quiet apologies, I had found something lighter. Not happiness exactly, but wholeness. A sense that I didn't have to keep asking, do I matter? Because I knew now that I did. Not because of a birthday. Not because of who remembered me or who forgot. But because I had decided I did. Mira noticed, of course. One evening, as I came in from a late workshop, she watched me hang up my jacket and said, "You're different." I turned slowly. How so? You don't walk like you're waiting for someone to ask you how you're doing. I smiled. That's because I'm not. She nodded, chewing her bottom lip. You seem lighter. I am. She walked over and touched my arm. I'm glad, she whispered. But I didn't reach for her hand like I might have before. I let the moment stay where it was. A shared acknowledgement. No more. No less. Zara, too, started following the shift. She began volunteering at the same rec center after school. Said it was for extra credit, but I saw the way her eyes lit up when a kid asked for help on their homework. I saw how she smiled when I told her she did a good job. Real smiles. Not forced. We didn't talk about the birthday much anymore. But we didn't need to. It hung in the air like a landmark, something we passed on our way to something new. A reminder, not a weight. One afternoon, she brought home a plant. A small jade plant in a black ceramic pot. This is for your office, she said. It's supposed to bring luck and peace. I looked at it for a long time before saying, thank you. She shrugged. I figured, your new life deserves something green. That night, I placed the plant beside my laptop, beside the framed photo of me and Corey's baby girl at the backyard party. I looked at them both and thought, maybe this is the beginning of something I build from scratch. Not a new family, not a new house, but a new version of myself. And if they wanted to walk beside me as I built it, good. But I wasn't waiting anymore. The shift in me wasn't about rebellion. It was about rebirth. There's a kind of silence that arrives not from absence, but from reflection. The kind that fills a room after truth has been spoken and heard. That was the silence in our home now. Not tense, not strained. Just still. The package, the video, the birthday, that day had become a shadow, something always just around the corner of every conversation. No one brought it up directly anymore. But it hung in the air when Mira paused before speaking, when Zara knocked before entering my study, when the kitchen felt just a little more deliberate with every interaction. They had watched it. They had felt it. And now, they were living with it. I never asked them what they thought of the video. I didn't need to. I saw it written all over their faces. Myra's eyes were softer now, like they were always searching for ways to repair something without undoing the truth. Zara lingered longer in rooms we shared, sometimes starting conversations about anything but clearly wanting everything. I could feel the shift in them. But more importantly, I could feel the shift in me. I no longer lived waiting for them to catch up to my emotions. I no longer hoped they'd say the right thing to fill the cracks. I'd already built something sturdier within myself, within the spaces I moved in, within the people I now surrounded myself with. And that's when I realized the greatest revenge wasn't anger. It wasn't a dramatic exit or a cold shoulder or bitter silence. The greatest revenge was showing them the joy they missed. That morning, I printed one last photo. It was one I had taken without realizing it during the party, a timer shot that captured me mid-laugh, holding a plate of Harold's food, standing in the middle of the yard with people in the background smiling, talking, clapping. I looked alive and undeniably happy. I slipped it into a simple black frame and placed it on the mantel in the living room, right between a photo of Zara's 6th grade graduation and one from our last family vacation 5 years ago. I didn't say a word about it. But later that evening, I noticed Mira standing in front of the fireplace, staring at it. Her voice was quiet when she said, "You looked so free that day." I answered from behind her. She turned to face me. I should have been there. I nodded. You should have. She didn't defend herself. Didn't try to rewrite history. She just looked at the photo again and said, "That's the version of you I miss." The one I didn't realize was disappearing. I never disappeared, I replied. You just stopped looking. We didn't argue. We didn't cry. Some truths don't need dramatics. They just need to land. The next day, Zara handed me a flash drive. I edited something, she said. You can watch it whenever. That evening, I opened the file. It was a short montage, a quiet video of clips and photos, some pulled from old family tapes, some recent. She had titled it, Dad, We Remember Now. There were scenes of me teaching her to ride a bike, laughing with her in the backyard as a toddler, tying her shoes, walking with her hand in mine at the school gates. Moments I didn't even remember were being captured. The music underneath was soft piano and strings. No lyrics, just memory. At the end of the video, her voice came in. I'm sorry we forgot you. I'm sorry we let someone else show you what we should have. But I see you now, and I love who you are. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. I just closed the laptop and sat with it. Not out of sadness, but peace. She had finally understood. Mira never saw the video unless Zara showed her. I didn't ask, but the next week, Mira did something I didn't expect. She hosted a dinner. Nothing fancy, just close friends. A few old neighbors. Corey and his family. Harold. Even Nia. She set the table. Made the food herself. No caterers. No shortcuts. At the center of the table was a small chalkboard sign. It read, Today is a good day. I walked in, stunned, and Mira smiled softly. I wanted to see your people. I wanted to see the joy I missed, she said. That night, she watched. Really watched. As Harold made people laugh with wild stories. As Corey toasted to second chances. As Nia played under the stars again. Zara stood beside her most of the evening, quiet but present. They both saw it now, not just what they had missed, but what had never required them to show up in the first place. I didn't speak about the birthday. Didn't mention the fishing trip. I didn't have to. They now lived with that memory the way I once did with weight. And that weight was their own to carry. After the guests left, I stood outside under the string lights again. Same place I had been weeks ago. But this time, I wasn't alone. Zara came up beside me. Do you think we'll ever make it up to you? She asked. I looked at her, my grown daughter who had once held my hand on Halloween and asked if monsters were real. You don't need to make it up, I said. You just need to remember. She nodded. I will. And then Mira stepped out too, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She stood on the other side of me, hands folded. We lost something, she whispered. But maybe we found something else. I didn't say anything, but I didn't move away. They needed that memory more than I did now. They needed to remember the empty seat at the table, the quiet birthday, the laugh they didn't hear, the love they didn't see. They needed to remember the day I stopped waiting and the version of me that blossomed because of it. And they would. Every time they looked at that framed photo. Every time they heard Nia's music again. Every time I smiled and it wasn't for them. That would be the memory they'd never shake. And that, more than anything, was the gift. I sat across from Lorraine at our favorite brunch spot, the one with the big windows and the smell of fresh coffee always hanging in the air. 12 years of marriage, and there she was, sliding divorce papers across the table like they were a menu special. She had this little smirk on her face, like she'd just won something big. I didn't expect it, not the papers, not the smirk, not the way she leaned back in her chair, so sure of herself. She'd always been cunning, sure, but this was a new level, even for her. The sunlight caught her blonde hair as she sipped her mimosa, acting like nothing was wrong. Next to her sat Carter, her new guy, all muscles and a shiny watch he kept tilting so everyone could see it. He grinned at me, like he was in on some joke I didn't get yet. The papers sat there between us, crisp and white, a neat little stack that spelled out the end. I didn't pick them up right away. I just stared at them, then at her, trying to figure out when she'd turned into this person. 12 years, building a life, a home, memories, and she was tossing it all like it was nothing, like day-old toast you leave on the counter. I could feel the waitress hovering nearby, probably wondering why the mood at our table had gone so cold. Lorraine didn't care. She just kept that smirk, waiting for me to react, maybe hoping I'd yell or beg or make a scene. But I didn't. I wasn't going to give her that. You're really doing this here? I asked, keeping my voice low steady. The clatter of plates and chatter from other tables filled the silence she left. She shrugged, like it was no big deal, and said, It's as good a place as any, Miles. Miles. She hadn't called me that in years. Usually it was honey or babe, back when things were softer between us. Now it was Miles, like I was just some guy she used to know. Carter chuckled, flexing his arm a little as he reached for his coffee, showing off like that made him better than me. I wanted to knock that stupid watch off his wrist, but I didn't move. I just sat there, letting it sink in. The papers had her signature already, bold and loopy, the way she always signed things. She'd planned this, probably for weeks, maybe months. I thought about the last few years, how she'd started staying out later, how she'd stopped asking about my day, how she'd roll her eyes when I talked about work. I chalked it up to stress, to us drifting a little. But this wasn't drifting. This was her jumping ship, and Carter was the lifeboat she'd picked. I wondered what he had that I didn't. Money? Looks? A louder laugh? Whatever it was, she thought it was enough to replace what we'd built. I picked up the pin the waitress had left with the bill. Lorraine's eyes flicked to it, and her smirk grew, like she'd won already. She probably thought I'd fight, drag this out, give her the messy divorce she could brag about to her friends. But I wasn't in the mood for her games. I signed the receipt for brunch. Pancakes, eggs, her mimosa, the whole stupid meal, and slid it back across the table. "See you in court," I said, looking right at her. No yelling, no pleading, just those 4 words. Her smirk faltered for a second, just a tiny crack, but I saw it. Carter shifted in his seat, like he wasn't sure what to do now that I wasn't playing along. I stood up, dropped some cash on the table, more than enough to cover it, and walked out. The bell above the door jingled as I left, and I could feel their eyes on my back. Outside, the air was cool, sharper than I expected, and I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Lorraine thought she'd caught me off guard, thought she'd humiliated me in our favorite spot. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. She never had. I'd spent years building something bigger than she could imagine, and if she wanted to walk away with Carter and his flashy watch, that was fine. She'd find out soon enough what she was really leaving behind. The street was busy, people walking past with shopping bags and dogs on leashes, living their normal Sunday mornings. I shoved my hands in my pockets and started toward my car, the divorce papers still sitting on that table in my mind. I wasn't mad, not yet. I was just awake. For the first time in a long time, I felt awake. Lorraine thought this was her move, her big play. But she didn't know the board we were playing on. Not yet. I got in my car, started the engine, and pulled out into traffic. The radio hummed something low and steady, and I let it wash over me as I drove. She wanted a fight? She'd get one. But it wasn't going to look anything like she expected. I thought about calling Jules, my best friend, the guy who'd been with me since we were kids scraping by with nothing. He'd know what to say, probably tell me to laugh it off and keep moving. But I didn't call him yet. I just drove, letting the city blur past, replaying that smirk in my head. Lorraine thought she'd won. Carter thought he'd replaced me. They were wrong. This wasn't the end of anything, not for me. It was just the beginning. And by the time they figured that out, it'd be too late. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and turned toward home. Time to start planning. I sat in my office the next day. The divorce papers Lorraine had served me still fresh in my mind. But I wasn't crumbling, not the way she probably hoped. The room was quiet, just the hum of the city outside my window and the soft ticking of the clock on my desk. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how she'd underestimated me all these years. Let her think I was just another guy she could bleed dry in a courtroom, some boring strategist who shuffled money around and called it a living. That's what she'd always said. Anyway, half teasing, half serious, like my work was some dull game she didn't care to understand. If only she knew how much power I really held, how deep the roots of my world went. She'd picked the wrong fight this time. The truth was, I owned a lot more than she realized. Years ago, back when we were still happy, or at least pretending to be, I'd quietly bought Winston and Bright LLP, the law firm she'd hired to tear me apart. It wasn't some big, dramatic takeover you'd see in a movie. I did it through a shell company tied to my family's trust, a move so under the radar even Jules had raised an eyebrow when I told him. "Why a law firm?" he'd asked, leaning against my desk with that grin of his. "Because power isn't always loud," I'd said. And I meant it. I never bragged about money or flashed it around like Carter did with that ridiculous watch. I didn't need to. The kind of wealth I had didn't shout, it whispered, and it got things done. Lorraine had no idea. She'd strutted into that brunch spot yesterday, so smug, thinking she'd hired the best firm in the city to bury me. Winston and Bright wasn't just any firm. They were sharks, known for their scorched earth tactics, the kind of lawyers who dig up every receipt and old email to make you look like a monster. She probably thought it was perfect, a way to twist the knife and walk away with half of everything. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that every move they made, every strategy they cooked up, was happening under my roof. I owned them. The junior associate she'd probably charmed into taking her case? He worked for me. The fancy office she'd visited to sign the retainer? Mine. It was almost funny if it didn't sting so much. I picked up the phone and dialed Jules. He answered on the second ring, his voice easy like always. "Hey, man, you holding up after yesterday?" he asked. I could hear the clink of a coffee mug in the background. He was probably at his place, feet up, already digging into the day. "Yeah," I said, keeping it simple. "She hired Winston and Bright." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "No kidding? You're firm." I could hear the grin in his voice now, and it made me smile despite everything. "Yep, my firm." He laughed, short and sharp. "She's got no clue, does she?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "Not yet, but she will." We talked for a while, tossing ideas back and forth. Jules was my COO, the guy who kept the gears turning at the holding company I'd built from nothing. He knew the business inside out, knew every asset, every shadow move I'd made to grow it quietly over the years. The trust, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, he'd helped me set it all up, piece by piece. Lorraine thought I was just a guy with a decent job, maybe a few investments. She didn't know about the millions tucked away, the properties, the stakes in firms like Winston and Bright. I'd kept it that way on purpose. Flashy guys like Carter showed off because they had to prove something. Me? I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I hung up with Jules and pulled out the file on Winston and Bright. It wasn't thick, just a few pages detailing the acquisition, the ownership structure, the legal cover I'd put in place to keep my name off the public records. I bought it 5 years ago, back when Lorraine was still talking about starting a family, before things started to sour. The firm had been a smart move then, a way to diversify, to have a foothold in the legal world. Now it was a weapon, one she'd handed me without even realizing it. I flipped through the pages, my fingers brushing the edges, and felt a strange calm settle over me. She wanted to play dirty? Fine. I'd play smarter. The phone buzzed again. Elias Ward, my attorney. "Miles," he said when I picked up, his voice all business. I got the heads up from Jules. "Winston and Bright, huh?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah, she thinks she's got me cornered." Elias chuckled, dry and quick. "She's in for a surprise. You want me to pull the plug now, or wait for court?" I thought about it, picturing Lorraine's smirk again, the way she'd tossed her hair like she'd already won. "Wait," I said. "Let her walk in thinking she's got it all figured out. Then we drop it." He didn't argue. Elias was sharp, the kind of lawyer who didn't waste words. "Got it. See you at the courthouse." I hung up and leaned back again, the city skyline stretching out beyond the glass. Lorraine thought this divorce was her chance to take me down, to walk away with everything I'd built. She didn't know the half of it, literally. The money she thought she'd get her hands on? That was just the surface, the stuff I let her see. The real wealth, the real power, was locked away where she'd never find it. And Winston and Bright? That was just the start. I closed the file, slid it back into the drawer, and locked it. Let her come at me with her lawyers and her new boyfriend. Let her think she was in control. I'd been building this empire for years, quiet and steady, and I wasn't about to let her, or anyone, tear it down. I woke up on court day with the kind of calm you feel before a storm hits, quiet, heavy, like the air knows something's coming. The divorce hearing was in a few hours, and I could already picture Lorraine strutting in, all polished and ready to take me apart. I got out of bed, the hardwood floor cold under my feet, and went through the motions. Shower, coffee, suit. Nothing fancy, just a charcoal jacket and pants, the kind I'd worn 100 times to meetings. I didn't need to show off, not today, not ever. This wasn't about looking good. It was about being ready. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie, and thought about how she'd probably spend hours picking her outfit, something sharp and expensive to match Carter's flashy style. That was her game. Mine was different. I grabbed my keys and headed out, the morning sun just starting to cut through the haze over the city. Jules was waiting for me at the courthouse. He'd texted earlier, saying he'd meet me there, no questions asked. That's how he was. Always there when it mattered, no fuss. I drove in silence, no radio, just my thoughts bouncing around. I wasn't nervous, not exactly. I'd been in tough spots before, built my whole life from nothing, and this wasn't going to break me. Lorraine thought she had the upper hand with her fancy lawyers and her new boyfriend hanging off her arm like some trophy. She didn't know what I had waiting for her. When I pulled up to the courthouse, Jules was already there, leaning against a pillar outside, hands in his pockets. He grinned when he saw me, that easy smile that hadn't changed since we were kids. "Looking sharp, Miles," he said, falling into step beside me as we headed up the steps. "You ready to watch her squirm?" I nodded, keeping my face steady. "Yeah, let's just get it done." He clapped me on the shoulder, and we walked inside, the echo of our shoes on the marble floor mixing with the low hum of voices. The place smelled like old wood and paper, the kind of smell that sticks to you. People moved around us, lawyers with briefcases, clerks shuffling files, regular folks looking lost. I kept my eyes forward, focused. We found our courtroom, and I saw Lorraine before she saw me. She was standing near the front, wearing a sleek black power suit that probably cost more than my car payment. Carter was next to her, all broad shoulders and a grin that said he thought he'd already won. He had his arm around her waist, possessive, like she was his prize. She didn't even glance my way when I walked in, just tossed her hair and laughed at something he said, her voice cutting through the room. I felt a flicker of something. Anger, maybe, or just irritation, but I pushed it down. This wasn't the time. I took my seat on the defendant's side, Jules sliding in beside me, still grinning like he knew something she didn't. He did. We both did. Elias showed up a minute later, his suit crisp, his face all business. He set his briefcase on the table and started flipping through papers, barely looking up. "Morning," he said, voice low. "They're cocky. Good. Makes this easier." I nodded, watching him work. Elias was the best, sharp, no nonsense, the kind of guy who could cut through a lie with one question. I'd hired him years ago for a business deal, and now he was here, ready to turn Lorraine's plan inside out. He didn't care about the drama, just the facts, and that's what I needed today. Across the aisle, Lorraine's lawyer, a young guy named Braden Kell, was fussing with his notes, adjusting his tie like he was about to give a speech to a stadium. He had that eager look, like he thought this was his big break. Lorraine must have picked him because he was hungry, the type who'd fight dirty just to prove himself. She leaned over and whispered something to him, her hand brushing his arm, and he nodded, all puffed up. Carter sat back in his chair, legs spread wide, like he owned the place. I almost laughed. They had no idea what was coming. The bailiff stepped forward, his voice booming through the room. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Miriam Calloway." Everyone stood, the rustle of clothes and papers filling the space. I straightened up, hands at my sides, watching as the judge walked in. She was older, maybe 60, with steel gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that didn't miss a thing. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and nodded at the bailiff. "Be seated," she said, her voice firm, no room for nonsense. We all sat, and I felt Jules nudge me under the table, his grin still there. This was it. Judge Calloway looked over her papers, then up at the room. "Case number 4721, Caldwell versus Knox," she said, her tone flat. "Counsel, please identify yourselves." Elias stood first, buttoning his jacket. "Elias Ward, representing Miles Knox, Your Honor." He sat back down, smooth and quick. Braden popped up next, flashing a smile that was too big for the room. "Braden Kell, representing Lorraine Caldwell, Your Honor, with Winston and Bright LLP." He sat down, looking pleased with himself, like saying the firm's name was enough to win. I glanced at Lorraine. She was staring straight ahead, that smirk from brunch still lingering on her lips. Carter shifted beside her, checking his watch again, probably thinking this would be over fast. They thought they had me pinned, me, the boring husband who'd let her walk all over him for years. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my face blank. The courtroom felt smaller now, the air thicker, like everyone was holding their breath for what came next. Judge Calloway tapped her pen once, twice, then set it down. She looked at me, then at Braden, then back at me. I met her eyes and waited. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to blink. The courtroom was buzzing with that low hum you get when everyone's waiting for something to happen, but they don't know what. I sat there, hands resting on the table, watching Lorraine across the aisle. She was leaning toward Braden, whispering something, her fingers tapping the edge of her chair like she couldn't wait to get this over with. Carter sat next to her, slouched back, one arm draped over the seat like he was at a ball game, not a divorce hearing. I could feel Jules beside me, his energy all coiled up, ready to see this play out. Elias was still flipping through his papers, calm as ever, like he'd done this 1,000 times. He had. But this time was different. This time, I had the ace up my sleeve. Braden stood up, smoothing his jacket, that cocky grin plastered on his face. "Your Honor," he started, his voice loud, like he wanted the whole room to hear how sure he was. I'm here today representing Lorraine Caldwell in what we believe is a straightforward case. My client has endured years of emotional neglect from Mr. Knox, a man who prioritized his work over their marriage. We're seeking a fair division of assets, including half of his reported income and properties, as well as spousal support to ensure Mrs. Caldwell can maintain the lifestyle she's accustomed to. He paused, glancing at Lorraine like she'd coached him on that line. She nodded, her smirk growing, and Carter gave a little snort, like it was all so obvious. I didn't move, didn't flinch. Just watched him lay out his opening, piling up words like they were bricks in a wall he thought I couldn't climb. Emotional neglect, funny how she spun that one. I'd spent years keeping our life steady, paying the bills, building something solid, while she'd started drifting, chasing whatever caught her eye. Now it was Carter, with his gym muscles and that watch he kept flashing. Braden kept going, tossing out numbers, my salary, the house, some savings account she'd dug up, like he'd already won. I let him talk. The more he said, the better this was going to feel. Then Judge Calloway raised her hand, just a small lift, but it stopped Braden mid-sentence. He froze, mouth half open, like a kid caught talking in class. The room went dead quiet, every eye on her. She adjusted her glasses, peering over them at me, then at Braden, then back at me again. I met her gaze, steady, not giving anything away. She tapped her pen once on the desk, the sound sharp in the silence, and leaned forward. "Mr. Knox," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "As the registered majority owner of Winston & Bright LLP, would you like to proceed with allowing this representation to continue?" It was like someone dropped a bomb in the room, and the blast just hung there, silent and heavy. Braden's face went slack, his papers slipping a little in his hands. Lorraine's head snapped toward me, her smirk gone, replaced by wide eyes and a mouth that couldn't decide whether to close or drop open more. Carter sat up straight, blinking fast, and muttered, "Wait, what? Does that mean they're disqualified or something?" His voice sounded small, confused, like he'd wandered into the wrong movie. Jules nudged me under the table, and I could feel his grin without even looking. Elias didn't react, just kept his eyes on his notes, but I saw the tiniest twitch at the corner of his mouth. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, and looked right at Judge Calloway. "No, Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice even, calm. "I'd like to withdraw their representation. Effective immediately." The words landed like stones, solid and final. Braden made a choking sound, like he'd swallowed his own tongue, and Lorraine shot up from her chair, her hands slamming down on the table. "What?" she yelled, loud enough that the bailiff took a step forward. He can't do that." Her face was red now, all that polished confidence cracking apart. Judge Calloway didn't blink. She just turned her head slightly toward Lorraine, those sharp eyes locking on her. "Mrs. Caldwell, sit down," she said, her tone flat but firm. Lorraine hesitated, then dropped back into her seat, glaring at me like she could burn a hole through my skull. Braden was flipping through his notes now, frantic, muttering something under his breath. Carter leaned over to Lorraine, whispering, "What's he talking about?" "He owns them." She didn't answer, just kept staring at me, her chest rising and falling fast. I sat back, letting the moment sink in. I could have told her years ago about Winston and Bright, about how I bought it quietly, tucked it into my holdings like a card I didn't need to play yet. But I didn't. I never bragged, never flaunted it. She thought I was just some guy who moved money around, boring and predictable. Now she was finding out the hard way that I'd been playing a bigger game all along. Judge Calloway tapped her pen again, looking at Braden. "Counselor, do you have anything to say?" He stammered, pushing his hair back with a shaky hand. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. I wasn't informed. My firm didn't disclose." She cut him off with a look. "Mr. Kell, your firm's ownership isn't my concern. Mr. Knox has the legal right to terminate representation as the majority stakeholder, provided it aligns with ethical standards. We'll address that shortly. For now, I suggest you sit down." Braden sank into his chair, looking like a kid who'd just lost his lunch money. The room stayed quiet, everyone waiting for what came next. Lorraine's eyes were still on me, burning with questions she didn't dare ask out loud yet. Carter shifted, uncomfortable, like he was starting to realize he'd picked the wrong team. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just sat there, letting them stew. This was the moment I'd waited for, the one I'd set up years ago without even knowing it had come to this. She'd walked in thinking she'd destroy me, but I'd already turned her weapon into mine. And we weren't done yet. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath after Judge Calloway's words settled over us. I sat there, hands folded on the table, watching Lorraine unravel across the aisle. She'd shot up again, ignoring the judge's order to sit, her voice shrill as she pointed at me. This isn't legal. He's sabotaging me. You can't just let him do this. Her hair was slipping out of its perfect twist, strands falling around her face, and her hands were shaking. Braden grabbed at her arm, trying to pull her back down, his face pale and sweaty. Lorraine, please, he hissed, but she yanked away, glaring at me like I'd set her whole world on fire. Maybe I had. Carter just sat there, blinking, his big shoulders slumped like he didn't know what to do with himself. Babe, what's happening? He mumbled, loud enough for me to hear. She didn't answer, just kept staring at me, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. I didn't move, didn't say a word. I just looked back at her, calm and steady, letting her feel the weight of what she'd walked into. Judge Calloway cleared her throat, sharp and loud, and Lorraine finally dropped back into her seat, but her glare never left me. The judge adjusted her glasses and turned to Braden. Mr. Kell, I assume you have an explanation for why your client seems so surprised by this. Braden fumbled with his papers, his tie crooked now, his confidence gone. Your Honor, Mrs. Caldwell wasn't aware of Mr. Knox's ownership. Neither was I. There's been no disclosure, no conflict check. That Judge Calloway cut him off, her voice like steel. That's your firm's problem, not mine. Mr. Knox has the right to withdraw representation as the majority owner, provided it doesn't breach ethical constraints. Let's address that now. She flipped a page in front of her, scanning it quick. Mrs. Caldwell's intake form with Winston and Bright. Did she disclose her prior relationship with the defendant? Braden froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Lorraine snapped her head toward him, her voice low but furious. What's she talking about? I told you everything. He swallowed hard, turning to her. You said, you didn't mention he owned the firm. You just said you were married to him. Lorraine's face went white, then red again. I didn't know he owned it. How was I supposed to know that? Her voice cracked, and Carter shifted in his seat, looking at her like she'd just grown a second head. Judge Calloway didn't flinch. She just kept her eyes on Braden. So she failed to disclose a potential conflict, and your firm failed to identify it. That makes this simple. Representation is disqualified due to the omission on the intake form. Mr. Knox's withdrawal stance. She tapped her pen once, final, like a hammer hitting a nail. Lorraine exploded again, slamming her hands on the table. I didn't lie. I picked your firm because it was the best, not because of him. He's twisting this. He's cheating. The bailiff took another step forward, but Judge Calloway waved him off, her face hard. Mrs. Caldwell, control yourself, or I'll have you removed. I leaned back in my chair, feeling Jules nudge me again, his grin wide now. Elias scribbled something on his notepad, still cool as ice. Across the aisle, Lorraine was falling apart, and I could see it in her eyes. She was starting to realize she'd misjudged me, bad. She'd picked Winston and Bright because she thought it was some big, unbeatable machine that had crushed me in court. She didn't know it was mine, didn't know I'd bought it years ago, back when she was still smiling at me across the dinner table. I'd never told her, not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't need to. She'd always laughed at my boring work, never asked about the details. Now those details were biting her back. Braden tried to recover, standing up again, his voice shaky. Your Honor, this puts my client at a severe disadvantage. We request a continuance to secure new counsel. Judge Calloway didn't even look at him, just kept writing something. Request noted. But Mrs. Caldwell chose her representation, and she'll live with the consequences of that choice today. We proceed with what's on the table. Braden sank back down, defeated, and Lorraine turned to me, her voice low and venomous. You planned this, didn't you? You set me up. I met her eyes, kept my face blank. No, Lorraine. You set yourself up. It was the first thing I'd said since the bombshell dropped, and it hit her like a slap. She flinched, then turned away, muttering something to Braden I couldn't hear. Carter leaned over again, whispering, So what now? She's got no lawyer. Lorraine shoved him back, snapping, Shut up, Carter. He recoiled, looking lost, and I almost felt bad for him. Almost. The judge moved on, calling Elias up to present my side. He stood, smooth and steady, laying out a simple defense. Our marriage had ended. I'd provided for her, and her claims of neglect were exaggerated. No fireworks, just facts. Lorraine didn't have much to fight back with now, not without Braden scrambling beside her. I watched her the whole time, saw the panic creeping in, the way her hands twisted together in her lap. She'd walked in here thinking she'd walk out with half my life in her pocket. Now she was stuck. No lawyer, no plan, just her and Carter staring at a wall they couldn't climb. When Elias sat down, Judge Calloway looked at Lorraine. "Mrs. Caldwell, you're welcome to represent yourself for the remainder of this hearing, or we can adjourn after Mr. Knox's counsel finishes. Your call." Lorraine didn't answer right away, just glared at me, then at the judge, then back at me. Finally, she muttered, "I need time." The judge nodded. "Very well. Hearing adjourned until tomorrow, 9 a.m. Get your house in order." She banged a gavel, and the room exhaled. I stood up, buttoning my jacket, and Jules clapped me on the back. "That was beautiful, man," he said, laughing low. I didn't smile, just nodded and headed for the door. Lorraine was still sitting there as I passed, her eyes burning into me. I didn't look back. She'd figure out soon enough that this wasn't sabotage, it was just me playing the hand I'd been holding all along. I walked out of the courtroom with Jules at my side, the echo of Judge Calloway's gavel still ringing in my ears. The hallway was busy, people shuffling past, lawyers barking into phones, clerks hauling stacks of files, but it felt like the world had slowed down just for me. Lorraine was back there, scrambling, probably yelling at Braden or Carter or anyone who'd listen, but I didn't care. I'd done what I needed to do, flipped her whole game upside down, and now she was stuck. No lawyer, no plan, just her own mess staring her in the face. Jules nudged me as we hit the stairs, his voice low and amused. "She's gonna lose it out there, man. You see her face when the judge shut her down." I nodded, keeping my eyes forward. Yeah, she didn't see it coming. Outside, the air was crisp, the kind of March chill that wakes you up. I stopped on the courthouse steps, hands in my pockets, and took a deep breath. Jules leaned against the railing, grinning like a kid who just won a bet. "What's next?" "She's got no one to fight for her now, think she'll cave." I shrugged, watching cars roll by on the street below. "Maybe. Depends how stubborn she wants to be." He laughed, short and sharp. "Stubborn's her middle name. But she's got no moves left. You've got her cornered." He was right. Lorraine was out of options. After Judge Calloway disqualified Winston and Bright, she tried calling other firms right there in the courthouse lobby. I'd seen her on her phone as I walked out, pacing, her voice rising with every word. But word travels fast in this city. No decent lawyer was going to jump into a case that had just blown up like that, not with her screaming at staff and Carter heckling the bailiff like some drunk fan at a game. She dug her own hole, and now she was standing in it, alone. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Back at my office, I sat down with Elias to figure out the next step. He was already at the table when I got there, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up, a cup of coffee steaming in front of him. "She's got until tomorrow morning," he said, not looking up from his laptop. "But she's not going to find anyone good in that time. Best she'll get is some bottom feeder who'll take her money and flail." I sat across from him, loosening my tie. "What's our play?" He tapped a few keys, then slid a folder over to me. "We offer her a settlement. Clean, simple, fair. She signs, we're done. She fights, she loses more." I opened the folder, numbers, terms, a breakdown of what I was willing to give her. It wasn't half, not even close, but it was enough to keep her quiet, let her walk away with something. The house, some cash, a little piece of what she thought she deserved. The real stuff, my holdings, the trusts, the offshore accounts, that was untouchable, locked up where she'd never find it. Elias leaned back, sipping his coffee. "She'll hate it, but she's got no leverage. Judge Calloway's already pissed. She threatened sanctions if Lorraine wastes more time tomorrow." I nodded, flipping through the pages. "Think she'll take it?" He smirked, just a little. "She won't want to. But she's not stupid. Once she calms down, she'll see it's her only out." I closed the folder and slid it back. "Draft it up. Let's get it to her today." Elias didn't argue, just got to work, his fingers flying over the keyboard. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city stretching below. This was it, the end of 12 years, wrapped up in a few sheets of paper. It didn't feel like a win, not yet. Just a step. Later that afternoon, Elias sent the settlement offer to Lorraine's email, her personal one, since she didn't have a lawyer to handle it now. I pictured her opening it, sitting in that big house we used to share, Carter probably hovering nearby, confused and useless. She'd read it, fume, maybe throw something. But she'd have to face reality eventually. I wasn't budging, and she didn't have the firepower to make me. By evening, I got a call from Elias. "She responded," he said, his voice flat. "Says it's insulting, wants double." I told her no dice, take it or see us in court tomorrow. I wasn't surprised. Lorraine always pushed, always wanted more. What did she say to that? I asked, leaning against my desk. Elias chuckled, dry and quick. She hung up. But she's rattled. Give her a few hours, she'll crack. I hung up and poured myself a glass of water, staring at the bubbles rising in it. She could fight all she wanted, but the clock was ticking, and Judge Calloway wasn't playing games. Sanctions meant fines, maybe worse, and Lorraine didn't have the cash to throw around like that, not without me. The next morning, I was back in the courtroom, Jules beside me, Elias at the table. Lorraine walked in late, no lawyer, just Carter trailing behind her like a lost puppy. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, her suit wrinkled, like she hadn't slept. Judge Calloway didn't waste time. Mrs. Caldwell, I assume you're representing yourself? Lorraine nodded, her jaw tight. Yes, Your Honor. The judge raised an eyebrow. Very well. Mr. Ward, proceed. Elias stood, laying out the settlement offer again, calm and clear. Lorraine tried to interrupt, rambling about how I'd tricked her, how it wasn't fair, but Calloway shut her down fast. Enough, she said, her voice like a whip. You've had time to prepare. This isn't a soap opera. Accept the offer, or we move forward, and I'll be adding sanctions for delaying my docket. Lorraine went quiet, her hands clenched, and I saw the fight drain out of her. She signed the papers, her pen scratching hard against the page, her face bitter and furious. Carter walked out before she did, not even waiting. I watched her go, the door swinging shut behind her. It was over. She'd lost, and she knew it. I didn't feel like cheering. Just stood there, letting it sink in. She'd come at me with everything she had, and I'd turned it all back on her. Now she was gone, and I was still standing. I left the courthouse that morning with the settlement signed and Lorraine out of my life for good. The air outside felt lighter, like the weight of the last few months had finally lifted off my shoulders. Jules walked beside me, hands in his pockets, whistling some tune I didn't recognize. You did it, man, he said, glancing at me with that grin of his. She's gone, and you're still standing. How's it feel? I shrugged, stepping down onto the sidewalk. Doesn't feel like much yet. Just done. He nodded, like he got it, and we headed to my car in silence. The city hummed around us, horns honking, people rushing by, but I was in my own head, replaying the last few days, the look on Lorraine's face when she signed those papers, bitter and beaten. Back at my office, I shut the door and sat at my desk, the quiet wrapping around me like a blanket. The case file was still there, a thick stack of papers Elias had left behind. I pulled it over and flipped it open, not sure why, just needing to see it one last time. Lorraine had tried everything, dug up old text messages where I'd said I'd be late from work, bank records from accounts she thought were the whole story, anything she could twist into emotional neglect. I read through a few, dry, short messages about meetings and deadlines, stuff she'd ignored back then, but now tried to use against me. It was almost funny how desperate she'd gotten, but it didn't matter. Those were just the decoys, the surface stuff I let her see. The real assets, the millions, the properties, the stakes in firms like Winston and Bright were buried deep, locked in blind trust with Jules running the show. She never had a chance. I closed the file and leaned back, staring out the window at the skyline. The sun was dipping low now, painting the buildings gold and orange. I thought about how she'd walked in with Carter, so sure she'd take me down, and walked out alone, her boyfriend bailing the second it got hard. That's who she'd picked over me, some guy who couldn't even stick around when the going got tough. I didn't feel angry, though. Not anymore. I just felt free. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for years and finally set it down. Lorraine thought she knew me, thought I was just a boring guy who'd let her walk away with everything. She didn't know half of it, and now she never would. My phone buzzed on the desk, pulling me out of my thoughts. A text from Lorraine. Just one line. How long have you owned them? I stared at it, the words glowing on the screen, her voice practically jumping out of them. She meant Winston and Bright, of course. She was still reeling, still trying to figure out how I'd pulled it off. I could have answered. Told her I'd bought it 5 years ago, back when she was still pretending we had a future, back when I was building something bigger than she could imagine. But I didn't. I set the phone down, face up, and let it sit there, unanswered. She didn't deserve an explanation. She'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. I got up and poured myself a glass of water from the pitcher on the shelf, the coolness of it steadying me. The office was empty now. Jules had gone home. Elias was off doing whatever lawyers do after a win. It was just me and the hum of the building, the faint sounds of traffic filtering up from the street. I walked back to the window, glass in hand, and thought about what came next. This wasn't a victory lap. I didn't need to gloat or throw a party. That wasn't me. Lorraine had come at me with everything she had, and I'd turned it back on her without breaking a sweat. That was enough. I sipped the water, letting it roll down my throat, and remembered the early days with her, back when we were young, broke, figuring it out. She'd been different then, softer, laughing at my dumb jokes, curling up next to me on that ratty couch we'd found on the curb. Somewhere along the way, she'd changed, or maybe I just stopped seeing her clearly. Either way, it was over now. The divorce was final, the settlement locked in, and she was out of my life. I didn't need to look back, didn't need to wonder what could have been. I'd built something solid, something mine, and she couldn't touch it. The phone buzzed again, another message from her. I didn't check it, just turned it face down and left it there. Whatever she had to say, it didn't matter anymore. I finished the water and set the glass on the desk, then grabbed my jacket. The day was done, and I was ready to go home, not to the house we'd shared, but to the apartment I'd moved into a few months back, small and simple, just mine. I locked the office door behind me and took the elevator down, the soft ding of each floor marking the end of something. Out on the street, the air was cooler now, the city settling into night. I walked to my car, hands in my pockets, feeling lighter than I had in months. Lorraine's question echoed in my head. How long have you owned them? But I pushed it away. She'd find out eventually, maybe dig around and piece it together, but by then it'd be too late. I'd already moved on. The engine purred when I started the car, and I pulled out into traffic, the lights blurring past. This wasn't the end of my story, just the end of hers in it. And that was fine by me. I woke up the next morning in my new apartment, the sunlight slipping through the blinds and hitting the bare walls. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom place with a small kitchen and a view of the street, but it was mine, and that felt good. No trace of Lorraine here, no echoes of her voice or her stuff cluttering up the space. I got out of bed, the floor cool under my feet, and made coffee, the machine gurgling as I stood there in sweatpants and a t-shirt. The divorce was done, the papers signed, and now it was just me. I didn't feel like celebrating, not the way Jules probably expected, with drinks and loud laughs. That wasn't my style. I just wanted to keep moving, keep building. I took my coffee to the table, a little wooden thing I'd picked up cheap, and sat down, staring out the window. The city was waking up, cars rolling by, people heading to work. I thought about the last few days, the courtroom, Lorraine's meltdown, the way she'd signed that settlement with her jaw tight and her eyes spitting fire. She'd lost, and I'd walked away whole. But it didn't feel like a big win, not yet. It was more like a door closing, quiet and final, leaving me on this side with a clean slate. I sipped the coffee, strong and black, and let that sink in. A clean slate. I could do anything now. By noon, I was at the office, sitting with Elias and Jules in the conference room. The air smelled like printer ink and the sandwiches we'd ordered in. Elias was still riding the high of the hearing, his tie loosened, a rare smile tugging at his face. We should have seen her face when you pulled the plug on Winston and Bright, he said, leaning back in his chair. Priceless. Jules laughed, biting into his turkey sub. She thought she had you, man. Thought she'd walk out with your whole life in her purse. I nodded, picking at my own sandwich. Yeah, she didn't know what she was up against. We talked business after that, real business, not just the divorce mess. I'd been thinking about the firm, Winston and Bright, ever since the hearing. It was mine, sure, but it didn't feel right keeping it under that name, tied to the old guard and Lorraine's failed play. I want to rename it, I said, looking at Elias. Knox and Rivera. Clean it up, shift the focus. He raised an eyebrow, setting his coffee down. You serious? That's a big move. Jules grinned, leaning forward. Hell yeah, he's serious. My name on a law firm? I'm in. I smirked a little. First time I'd felt like smiling in days. It's not just about the name. We take it into tech litigation, philanthropy cases. Make it ours. Elias didn't argue, just nodded, already thinking it through. I like it. Fresh start, new direction. I'm in too. I promoted him to partner right there, no hesitation. He'd earned it, sticking with me through the chaos, turning Lorraine's attack into nothing. We shook hands, and Jules clapped us both on the back, laughing. Knox and Rivera. Sounds like a powerhouse already. It did. It felt right, something solid, something I could build on, with the two guys I trusted most. We spent the afternoon sketching it out, new branding, new cases, a quiet nod to where we'd started, me and Jules, scraping by with nothing but big ideas. Later that week, Lorraine texted again. I was at my desk, going through emails, when it popped up. I'm sorry, Miles. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I stared at it, the words sitting there like they wanted something from me. An apology after everything she'd pulled. I didn't feel angry, though. Didn't feel much at all. She'd made her choices, Carter, the divorce, the courtroom tantrums, and I'd made mine. I didn't owe her a response, didn't owe her anything. I deleted the message and kept working, the hum of the office filling the silence. The days turned into weeks, and I settled into the new rhythm. Knox and Rivera took shape. Elias brought in a tech startup case, some small company fighting a patent grab by a bigger fish, and we won it clean. I like that, helping the little guy, the ones who reminded me of myself way back when. I started spending less time at the office, though, letting Jules and Elias steer the ship. I needed space, time to figure out who I was without Lorraine's shadow hanging over me. I wasn't hiding, not like before, when I kept my wealth quiet to avoid the spotlight. I was just shifting. One night, I was at the apartment, cooking dinner, nothing fancy, just chicken and rice in a pan. The smell filled the place, warm and simple, and I realized I hadn't cooked like this in years. Lorraine always wanted takeout or restaurants, something to show off. This was better. I ate at the table, the TV off, just me and the quiet. It hit me then. I wasn't mad at her anymore. She tried to take me down, and I'd come out stronger. Not because I'd beaten her, but because I'd let her go. I didn't need to prove anything, didn't need her approval or her regret. I was done. I cleaned up, the clink of dishes in the sink grounding me, and looked around the place. Bare walls, a few boxes still unpacked, but it was starting to feel like home. I didn't need much, just enough to keep going. The firm was growing, my life was mine again, and Lorraine was a memory fading fast. I turned off the lights and headed to bed, the city buzzing outside. This was the rebuild, slow and steady, and I was good with that. I stood on the porch of the lake house I'd bought upstate, the early morning air cool and sharp against my skin. It was a few months after the divorce, and the city felt like a lifetime ago. The water stretched out in front of me, flat and quiet, reflecting the trees turning red and gold. I'd found this place on a whim. A small, weathered cabin with a dock and a view that made you forget the noise of everything else. It wasn't fancy, nothing like the big house Lorraine and I used to share, but that's why I liked it. No pretension, no ghosts. Just me and the stillness. I sipped my coffee, the mug warm in my hands, and let the peace settle in. This was the real win. Not the courtroom, not the settlement, just this. The weeks after the hearing had blurred together, setting up Knox and Rivera, tying up loose ends, moving on. I'd started coming up here on weekends, then stretching it into days at a time. I'd unpack a little more each trip, some books, a chair, a frying pan, and it was starting to feel like mine. I'd even learned to cook again, real stuff, not just the quick meals I'd thrown together in the apartment. Last night, I'd made a stew, chopping carrots and potatoes with a knife that had seen better days, the smell filling the cabin until it felt alive. Lorraine would have hated it. Too simple, too messy, but that didn't matter anymore. I was figuring out who I was without her, and it felt good. Back in the city, I'd started mentoring some young founders, kids with big ideas and no money, the way Jules and I used to be. I'd meet them at a coffee shop downtown, listen to their pitches, give them pointers on how to grow without getting crushed. They reminded me of myself at that age, hungry, scrappy, scared but too stubborn to quit. One guy, a wiry kid named Sam, had a plan for a tech app that could help small farmers track crops. I hooked him up with Elias for the legal side, gave him a little seed cash from my own pocket. Watching him light up, talking fast about his next steps, made me feel something I hadn't in a while. Useful, maybe even proud. I wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't keeping everything locked up tight. I was living. I set the mug down on the railing and walked to the edge of the dock, the boards creaking under my boots. The water lapped soft against the posts, and I thought about Jules asking me that question a few weeks back. We'd been at the office, late, going over some new case files, when he'd leaned back in his chair and said, "You ever regret marrying her?" I'd paused, surprised he'd even ask. Lorraine's face flashed in my mind, her smirk at brunch, her panic in court, but it didn't sting like it used to. No, I told him, meeting his eyes. She showed me exactly who I didn't want to become. He nodded, like he got it, and we'd moved on. No big moment, just the truth. Out here, that answer felt even truer. Lorraine had pushed me, hard, and I'd come out the other side sharper, clearer. She'd wanted flash, control, a life where she could show off and feel big. I'd wanted steady, real, something I could stand on. That's why I'd built what I had, quietly, piece by piece, not for applause but for myself. She tried to take it, thinking it was hers to claim, and I'd let her think she could, right up until I shut it down. But it wasn't about beating her, not really. It was about knowing who I was, what I'd made, and holding on to it. This lake house, the firm, the kids I was helping, that was the win. Not her walking away empty-handed. I headed back inside, the screen door banging shut behind me. The cabin was small, wood walls, a stone fireplace, a couch I'd hauled up in my truck. I'd left the city chaos behind, but I wasn't running. I still went back for meetings, still checked in with Jules and Elias, but this was my anchor now. I grabbed a book off the shelf, some old novel I'd found in a used shop, and settled into the couch, the fire crackling low. The words blurred a little as I read, my mind drifting back to those early days with Lorraine, when we'd been broke and hopeful, before she'd started chasing something else. I didn't miss her, not the way I thought I might. I missed the idea of us, maybe, but that was long gone. Later, Jules came up for the weekend. He pulled in Saturday afternoon, his car kicking up dust on the dirt road, and hopped out with a six-pack and a grin. "Nice spot," he said, looking around as we sat on the porch. "You going hermit on me?" I laughed, cracking open a beer. "Nah, just breathing." We talked about the firm. Knox and Rivera was picking up steam, more cases, a reputation that was starting to turn heads. He asked if I'd heard from Lorraine, and I shook my head. "Not since that apology text." "She's done." He nodded, sipping his beer. "Good. You don't need that noise." We stayed out there till the sun dipped below the trees, the lake going dark and still. Jules was right. I didn't need the noise. I'd spent years building in the shadows, keeping it quiet, and now I could step into the light on my terms. The real win wasn't the money or the firm or even outsmarting Lorraine. It was this clarity, peace, a life that fit. I leaned back in my chair, the night settling in, and felt whole. That was enough. I sat in the back of a courtroom a year later, the wooden bench hard under me, the air thick with that familiar smell of old paper and tension. It wasn't my case this time, just a wrongful termination suit, some single mom named Tara going up against a big corporation that had fired her for no good reason. She had Elias representing her, and I'd come to watch, quiet, keeping to myself. The room was half full, lawyers, a few reporters, regular folks like me who didn't stand out. I leaned back, arms crossed, and watched Elias work. He was sharp as ever, laying out Tara's story, how she'd been let go after asking for time off to care for her sick kid, how the company tried to bury her with paperwork and lies. She sat there, small but steady, her hands folded tight in her lap. The hearing went fast. Elias had the evidence locked down, emails, timestamps, a manager's slip-up in a deposition, and the other side didn't have much to fight back with. The judge, a younger guy with a tired face, ruled quick. Tara won, full back pay, and her job if she wanted it. She didn't smile, not right away, just nodded, like she couldn't believe it was real. I stayed in my seat as the room started to clear, watching her shake Elias's hand, her voice soft but strong. "Thank you," she said, then turned and saw me. She walked over, hesitant, her eyes searching mine. "You're Mr. Knox, right? Elias said you made this possible." I nodded, keeping it simple. "Just helped out where I could." She smiled then, small but real. "Thank you," she said again, and headed out, her steps a little lighter. I stayed there a minute, letting the quiet sink in. Elias came over, loosening his tie. "Good day," he said, sitting next to me. She deserved that win. I agreed, watching the last few people file out. "Yeah, glad we could do it." He didn't push, just sat there with me, the courtroom emptying around us. This was what Knox and Rivera was now. Cases like Tara's, people who needed a hand, not just big clients with deep pockets. It felt right, like the firm was finally what I'd wanted it to be. I'd started it with Jules years ago, built it quiet and steady, and now it was something more. Not loud, not flashy, just solid. I thought about Lorraine as I sat there, how she'd come at me in this same kind of room, thinking she'd tear me down. She'd walked in with her smirk and her fancy lawyers, so sure she'd walk out with half my life. But I'd already won before she even stepped through the door. Won because I'd built something she couldn't touch, something bigger than her games. That day felt far away now, like a story that happened to someone else. I didn't hate her, didn't even think about her much. She'd faded into the background, her and Carter and all their noise. While I kept going, step by step, I left the courthouse and drove up to the lake house that night. The road dark and winding, the stars sharp overhead. The cabin was waiting for me, same as always, wood walls, the faint smell of pine, the couch I'd worn in over months of quiet nights. I dropped my keys on the table and started a fire, the crackle filling the silence. It had been a year since the divorce, a year since I'd turned her attack into my freedom, and I'd spent it building something new. The firm, the mentoring, this place. It was all mine, shaped by my hands, not hers. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Didn't need the world to know my name. Tara knew, Sam the tech kid knew, Jules and Elias knew. That was enough. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat by the fire, the warmth seeping into me. The lake was out there, dark and still, a mirror for the sky. I thought about how I'd gotten here, from nothing, scraping by with Jules, to this. Lorraine had been part of it, sure, but she'd never understood it. She saw money, status, things to show off. I saw roots, something to stand on. That's why I'd bought Winston and Bright all those years ago, why I'd tucked my wealth away in trusts and shells. Not to hide, but to protect, to make sure no one could take it from me. She tried, and I'd let her think she could, right up until I pulled the rug out. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney, and I took a sip of the beer, cold and bitter. I didn't regret her, not the way people might expect. She pushed me to see what I was made of, forced me to draw a line and hold it. Without her, maybe I'd still be coasting, letting life happen. Now I was here, in this cabin, with a firm that mattered and a life that fit. Full circle, back to me, but better. I didn't need her to lose for me to win. I'd won by letting her go, by building something she couldn't break. I finished the beer and set the bottle down, leaning back into the couch. The night stretched out, quiet and deep, and I felt it, liberation, real and simple. Not many people knew who I was, not the full story. Not the kid who'd started with nothing, not the guy who'd outsmarted his ex in a courtroom, not the man sitting here now, whole and free. And that was how I liked it. I closed my eyes, the fire's glow warm on my face, and let the peace take over. She'd come to court thinking she'd destroy me, but I'd already won before she even walked through the door. The night my marriage ended, no one even realized it, not even me, at first. It didn't come crashing down in a spectacular fight or a tearful confession. It simply shifted, like a hairline crack splintering deeper and deeper through something you thought was unbreakable. Our house was glowing that night, pulsing with fake congratulations and hollow laughter as Marissa Holt, my wife, my partner for almost a decade, threw herself a surprise promotion party. Surprise, of course, meaning she organized every detail herself and acted shocked when everyone jumped out from behind the kitchen island. The guests poured in like a tidal wave, high on cheap champagne and Marissa's curated playlist. My parents, Gerald and Lorraine Cross, were the first to hoist their glasses, beaming as if they had just witnessed the birth of royalty. To the real breadwinner and our wonderful daughter-in-law, Gerald bellowed, sloshing his drink dangerously close to the cream carpet. Lorraine cackled, clutching Marissa's arm with the sort of grip usually reserved for emergency landings. I stood there, holding a glass of flat soda, nodding silently as the room erupted into cheers. The word breadwinner echoed in my ears longer than the laughter did. It wasn't the first time it had been thrown around. Lately, it had started creeping into conversations at family dinners, casual brunches, whispered jokes when people thought I wasn't listening. I always shrugged it off. What did it matter? We were a team, right? We built this life together. Or so I had convinced myself for years. I stayed out of the spotlight as usual. Marissa was draped across the center of every photo, every story, every memory made that night. I floated at the edges of conversations, a barely noticed shadow. Even when they posed for group shots, arms around each other, champagne glasses raised high, it was like I wasn't part of the narrative. I was just the background noise, the man holding the camera instead of being in the frame. Around midnight, after the last slice of cake had been abandoned on paper plates and the last of the faux adoration had dried up, I found myself alone in the kitchen, scraping frosting off the counter with the edge of a fork. Marissa strolled in, still buzzing from the attention, a smug little smirk curling the corners of her mouth. She was still in her new promotion dress, a tight red number she had charged to our shared card without bothering to mention it. She sauntered up to me like a queen addressing the help. And that's when she handed it to me, a neatly folded t-shirt. I blinked, confused at first, until I unfolded it and read the bold, black letters stretching across the fabric, "The loser of the house." I laughed. At least, I think it was a laugh. It sounded hollow, even to my own ears. Marissa laughed too, tossing her hair over her shoulder in that practiced way that used to make my chest ache with affection. "It's a joke, babe," she chirped, patting my chest like she was rewarding a golden retriever for rolling over on command. "Lighten up." I smiled. A polite, mechanical smile. One that didn't touch my eyes or my soul. I held the T-shirt up for a second longer, letting it flap in the breeze of the overhead fan, before neatly folding it again and setting it down on the marble island. Inside, something shifted. Clicked. Like a safe unlocking. Not anger. Not even sadness. Just readiness. A quiet, searing clarity that cut through the layers of denial I had wrapped myself in over the years. This wasn't an isolated moment. It was the culmination of 1,000 smaller betrayals. Every sneer, every undermining comment, every time she had chosen applause over partnership. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was done. The strangest thing was how easy it felt once the decision crystallized. I didn't storm out. I didn't shout or slam doors. I simply existed in a space that no longer belonged to me, knowing I had already left it in every way that mattered. I leaned against the counter, watched Marissa disappear into the living room to FaceTime her best friend about the amazing night, and felt something almost like peace settle over me. The man she mocked, the so-called loser, was already gone. She just hadn't noticed yet. Later that night, after she had passed out with a wine glass still clutched in her hand, I sat alone in our bedroom. The T-shirt was folded neatly beside me on the bed. I traced the letters with my fingertips, feeling nothing. Not rage, not bitterness, just a steady hum of inevitability. I thought about the years we had spent together, about the dreams we once shared, the ones that had quietly morphed into something I barely recognized. I thought about the man I used to be and the man I was ready to become. Not for her. Not for the approval of parents or coworkers or social media strangers. For me. I slipped the T-shirt into the bottom drawer of my dresser. Not as a keepsake. As a reminder. A reminder that tonight, in a house full of noise and hollow celebration, the real victory was happening quietly, invisibly, beneath the surface. I had smiled politely. But inside, I had already started walking away. The next morning, the sunlight cut sharp and clean through the blinds, slicing the room into strips of light and shadow. Marissa was already awake, perched in front of her vanity mirror, curling her hair with the slow, practiced movements of someone preparing for an audience. I lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on me like a heavy, invisible hand. Today was the day everything would shift. Today was the day I stopped living under someone else's thumb. I rose quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile peace of the morning. Marissa barely glanced at me, too busy humming some mindless pop song as she sculpted herself into the woman the world adored. Her reflection winked at itself, a satisfied, self-assured smirk curling on her lips. She had no idea what was about to hit her. No inkling that the pedestal she'd spent years building was about to crumble beneath her designer heels. I crossed to the closet and pulled out my briefcase. It was already packed. I'd prepared it weeks ago, tucking away every document, every carefully labeled folder, every recording burned onto sleek little USB drives. In the side pocket, my laptop sat charged and ready, its screen glowing faintly with the draft of an email scheduled to be sent at exactly 8:30 a.m. The final piece of a plan I had nurtured in silence, one careful move at a time. Marissa, oblivious, leaned closer to the mirror, puckering her lips to apply a coat of red lipstick that screamed confidence and authority. She looked every bit the queen she believed herself to be. In the past, that image would have made my heart swell with pride. Today, it left me cold. "Big day," she chirped without turning around, her voice light and dripping with false sweetness. "You gonna be okay without me tonight?" Another networking dinner. Very important people. You know how it is. I nodded, offering a thin smile she didn't bother to see. I wondered if she even remembered what today was, not that it mattered. This wasn't about a forgotten birthday or anniversary. It was about years of erosion, small cuts that had finally bled me dry. And now, standing here in the cool, sterile light of morning, I realized I wasn't the one who had lost anything. I was about to reclaim it all. She grabbed her bag, a glossy black tote that probably cost more than my first car, and slung it over her shoulder with a practiced flick. As she moved toward the door, she tossed a smirk over her shoulder, a little private victory dance she performed every morning, as if leaving me behind was some kind of prize. "Don't wait up," she said, disappearing down the hallway with a click of high heels on hardwood. The front door slammed. Silence swallowed the house. I glanced at the clock. 8:29 a.m. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers drumming lightly on the polished oak surface, listening to the steady tick of the wall clock counting down the final seconds. 8:30. The laptop screen blinked, confirming the scheduled email had been sent. I closed the device with a soft, decisive snap and exhaled slowly, feeling the air leave my lungs like a slow leak from a tire that had been under pressure for far too long. Across town, in the sleek glass towers of Marissa's office building, a ripple had already started. A quiet storm gathering force. Her boss, Simon Keene, the man she endlessly praised and flirted with at company parties, thinking I didn't notice, would be the first to open the file. Inside, detailed accounts, irrefutable evidence, names, dates, numbers. All the pieces they needed to see the truth. Marissa hadn't climbed the ladder through brilliance alone. She had stepped on others to do it, buried complaints, fudged numbers, cut corners, and smiled sweetly through every lie. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the wood like a trapped insect. I let it buzz. The first of many, I knew. I watched the screen light up with her name. Marissa. A name that used to conjure up warmth now stirred nothing but a cool, clinical detachment. The buzzing stopped, then started again almost immediately. I took another slow sip of my coffee, savoring the simple, grounding bitterness of it. Freedom, it turned out, tasted like Colombian dark roast with a hint of rebellion. By 9:05, the calls were coming faster, stacked on top of one another, a frantic cascade. I flipped the phone over so I wouldn't see the screen. I didn't need to hear the panic in her voice. I could imagine it well enough, the rising pitch, the frayed edges of carefully constructed composure shredding apart under pressure. She would be confused at first, then angry, then terrified. At 9:15, another buzz. I ignored it. I pictured her, summoned into the executive boardroom, a room she once boasted about commanding, now facing the men and women who had been fed evidence of her betrayal. I pictured Simon Keene's smug face curdling into cold fury as he realized how much trouble she had created, how vulnerable she had made the company. Marissa had spent so long believing she was untouchable. She was wrong. The house remained still, the ticking clock my only company. It was strange how peaceful it felt, knowing chaos was blooming somewhere else, far from my doorstep. I finished my coffee, rinsed the cup out in the sink, and packed away my laptop with the same care one uses to fold a flag. Precise, respectful, final. By the time I left the house, Marissa had sent 23 texts and called 14 times. I didn't answer any of them. I had no intention of answering. Not today, not ever again, unless it served a purpose. The storm had broken loose, and for once, I wasn't the one left standing in the wreckage. I was the one who had pulled the first thread, and I was ready for everything that came next. The funny thing about chaos is how quiet it feels when you're not the one caught in it. I watched the notifications on my phone pile up, message after message, voicemail after voicemail, each one more frantic than the last. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I slipped my phone into my jacket pocket, stepped out into the crisp morning air, and went about my day like it was any other Tuesday. First stop, Lila's Cafe, a cozy little place tucked between the towering gray buildings of downtown. It was a spot Marissa never visited, too small town for her taste, and that was exactly why I liked it. The moment I walked through the door, the bell chimed softly, and the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls wrapped around me like an old, trusted friend. Lila herself waved from behind the counter. "Morning, handsome." "Usual. Make it a double," I said with a small grin. She laughed and set to work. I slid into my favorite booth by the window, the leather seat creaking familiarly under me. Outside, the city buzzed, people rushing to meetings, to lives they thought they controlled. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring every moment of stillness, every second of freedom blooming quietly inside me. My next appointment was a few blocks away. A meeting I had been setting up for months, one careful brick at a time. Archer Wren, my lawyer, was already waiting in his office when I arrived. Archer wasn't flashy. He didn't wear designer suits or drive a car that screamed money. He was quiet, methodical, the kind of man who built victories out of patience and paperwork. The kind of ally you wanted when you were dismantling an empire from the inside out. We sat down across from each other, the thick oak table between us littered with neat stacks of documents. Archer tapped a manila folder. "It's done," he said simply. "Signed, sealed, and ironclad. If she tries to contest, she'll lose." "Hard." I nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle into my bones. "And the firm?" He smiled, a rare flicker of pride lighting up his usually stoic face. "Yours. Lock, stock, and barrel. The final signatures went through yesterday. As of this morning, you control 51% of the parent company." It was a moment I had imagined for a long time, but now that it was here, it didn't feel loud or victorious. It felt inevitable, natural, like stepping into shoes that had been waiting for me all along. I spent the next hour signing final papers, closing loops, tightening every legal net that needed to be secured. Archer reviewed everything with a hawk's eye, making sure no loose thread could be pulled by Marissa or anyone else desperate enough to try. When it was finished, we shook hands, a short, firm squeeze that carried the weight of months of preparation and unspoken respect. Outside Archer's office, I paused on the sidewalk, letting the reality sink in for a moment. I could feel the ripple effect already spreading through Marissa's world, tearing down the careful facade she had built. She thought she was the queen of her castle, but she never noticed the foundation rotting underneath her. And the best part? I wasn't just the messenger delivering the blow. I was the architect of the entire collapse. Simon Keene, the man Marissa had spent years chasing approval from, had received the file at exactly 8:30 a.m., right on schedule. But what he didn't realize, not yet anyway, was that the file didn't come from some bitter, betrayed husband looking for revenge. No, it came from the man who now owned the very company Simon thought he ruled. It had taken months of quiet maneuvering, careful negotiations, shell companies, and ironclad non-disclosure agreements. But I had done it. I had acquired the parent firm, the firm that controlled the company Marissa worked for, without anyone even realizing my hand was behind the purchase. Not Simon, not Marissa, not any of the smug board members who had looked through me like I was invisible at every gala and fundraiser. And now, with a single file, a single email, I had shifted the ground beneath all of them. I spent the afternoon tying up loose ends, all while ignoring the increasingly desperate flood of messages from Marissa. Her first calls had been sharp, demanding. Now they were panicked, pleading. I didn't need to listen to know the tone. I knew her well enough to predict every stage of her unraveling. Around 4 o'clock, I returned to Lila's cafe, ordered another coffee, and watched the sunset paint the city in strokes of gold and blood red. I thought about Marissa sitting in some sterile conference room, her world crumbling around her. About Simon Keene realizing that the man he had belittled at charity auctions now controlled his paycheck. I thought about how, for so long, I had played the role they wrote for me, the quiet husband, the second-place trophy, the loser of the house. I played it so well they believed it. They never looked deeper, never questioned whether the man pouring drinks at the party might have been planning something while they laughed at his expense. They played checkers. I played chess. And now the board was mine. As evening settled in, I allowed myself a small smile. It wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about making them hurt the way they made me hurt. It was about reclaiming the pieces of myself they had tried to carve away. Tomorrow would bring headlines, gossip, public implosions. Tonight? Tonight was for quiet victories. Victories no one saw coming. The news broke faster than even I expected. 1 minute, Marissa was sitting smugly at her glass desk, probably planning her next power move. The next, her world was caving in around her. It started small. A ripple. An internal email about an urgent meeting. A few raised eyebrows. Whispers in the hallway that grew louder with every passing minute. People shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, pretending to work, but all waiting, all sensing the shift in the air. The formal announcement hit the company intranet around 11 a.m., internal investigation initiated. Effective immediately, Marissa Holt is suspended pending a full review. Just like that, the woman who strutted through the building like she owned it was reduced to a paragraph of cold, clinical language. Her name, once spoken with admiration or envy, now drew sharp glances and muffled gossip. Internal investigation. Immediate suspension. Pending criminal charges. The trifecta. The friends who had cheered her on just the night before? They vanished. No more clinking glasses, no more sugary compliments. No one wanted to be associated with a sinking ship. People she once mentored didn't even look her way as she was summoned to the HR department. The social climbers she used to share bottomless mimosas with didn't send a single supportive text. Simon Keene, her ever-smirking boss, didn't offer her the dignity of a private conversation. He had 2 security guards waiting at her office door. She wasn't allowed to touch her files. She wasn't even allowed to grab her personal things unsupervised. Everything she had built, every illusion of control, of power, crumbled under the fluorescent lights. She was handed a single cardboard box. No farewell party. No gold watch. No hollow speeches about new beginnings. Just a box, and a growing audience pretending not to stare as she walked down the hallway she used to command, humiliated. Meanwhile, I sat comfortably in my home office, a quiet drink in my hand, watching everything unfold on the hidden security cameras I had installed months ago. Cameras she never noticed. Cameras she never cared to ask about. It was almost poetic, the woman who loved being the center of attention reduced to a silent movie on my screen. At exactly 3:14 p.m., I saw her stumble through our front door. Her hair was tangled from the wind, her eyes wide and rimmed with smeared mascara. Her expensive heels, the ones she once called power shoes, scuffed the hardwood as she dragged her cardboard box inside. And there it was, the final touch of irony. She was still wearing the t-shirt from the night before. Loser of the house. I leaned back in my chair, feeling no triumph, no gloating satisfaction. Just a deep, resolute calm. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't cruelty. It was consequence. She dropped the box onto the couch with a hollow thud and stood there, swaying slightly, like she was trying to wake up from a bad dream. I watched her glance around the room as if expecting someone, me, maybe, to swoop in and fix it all. But no one came. Not this time. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long moment before throwing it across the room. It bounced harmlessly off a cushion and landed with a soft thump. Another small, impotent explosion in a long chain of them. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my own phone. I didn't send a text or make a call to check on her. She was beyond my help. She had chosen this path long before today. Every lie she told. Every little manipulation she thought I was too dumb to notice. Every time she treated me like a fixture instead of a partner. She paved this road brick by brick. All I did was let her walk down it. On the camera feed, she collapsed onto the floor beside the couch, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, but I muted the sound. I didn't need to hear it to know exactly what she was feeling. Fear. Loneliness. The crushing realization that the world she built was made of paper, not stone. For a long time, I just sat there, sipping my drink, watching the woman who once saw herself as invincible finally realize she wasn't. Finally realize she was human. And humans bleed when the walls come crashing down. Marissa tried to storm into my office like she used to, like the woman who once held every key and every password. But the door didn't budge. She rattled the handle, banged her palm against the wood, even shouted my name. The lock, changed weeks ago without her noticing, held firm. I sat inside, calm, letting her frantic knocking echo through the hallways like some distant thunderstorm I had no need to run from. When she realized I wasn't coming, she pounded harder. Her voice rose, sharp and desperate, fraying at the edges. "Open the damn door. We need to talk. You can't just leave me like this." I leaned back in my chair and listened. Once, those words would have triggered something inside me, a need to fix things, to make everything better, to keep the peace no matter the personal cost. But not anymore. I had finally learned, some fires aren't meant to be put out. Some houses are meant to burn. When the banging stopped, there was a long stretch of silence. I imagined her out there, forehead pressed against the wood, trying to summon the right words, the right tricks. She thought she could still manipulate me. That if she just cried hard enough, promised sweetly enough, I'd open the door and hand her the tools to rebuild the tower she knocked down herself. But the paperwork was already filed. The moves were already made. I didn't need her permission anymore. She tried the back entrance next, storming through the kitchen, expecting to find some weakness, some crack in the armor. That's when she saw the divorce papers, right where I had left them, sitting neatly on the marble countertop next to the remnants of the party cake she had so proudly displayed the night before. It was almost cruel, the way the party decorations still lingered in the air, faded balloons drooping sadly, bits of glitter clinging to the corners. Celebration one night. Condemnation the next. The contrast must have gutted her. I watched from the security feed as she approached the table slowly, her steps unsteady. She picked up the papers with shaking hands, scanning the top page, her mouth moving wordlessly. Then her gaze flicked to the slice of leftover cake, still on its gold foil board. The words, "Congratulations, Marissa," smudged into oblivion by the passage of one bitter, endless night. Her hands trembled. She dropped the papers like they were burning her fingers. She must have thought she could retreat upstairs, regroup, call someone. Her parents, her sister, that lawyer friend she always bragged about knowing. But upstairs, the reality was even harsher. She had nothing left to cling to. The house she had once fought me tooth and nail for, the house she had weaponized in every argument, bragged about to every envious coworker, wasn't hers anymore. Months ago, I had quietly transferred the deed into a private trust, one she had no claim over, one she hadn't even noticed because she was too busy curating her Instagram perfect life. It was legal, it was binding, and it was airtight. The joint accounts we once shared? Gone. Emptied and moved into investments under my name alone. All legal, all meticulous. I had followed every step to the letter. Every I dotted, every T crossed. She couldn't even accuse me of theft. She had spent years letting me handle the finances because money was boring. Now, it wasn't just boring. It was fatal. When she realized the magnitude of it all, she crumpled to the floor right there. In the center of the kitchen, the documents sprawled around her like dead leaves. She sobbed loud, racking sobs that once would have cracked me straight down the middle. But now, I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, not even satisfaction. This wasn't cruelty. This was justice. I thought about all the times I had stood exactly where she was now, broken, unheard, begging for a shred of respect, a flicker of acknowledgement. I thought about the times she rolled her eyes at my ideas, laughed at my dreams, cut me down in front of friends under the guise of joking. I thought about the nights I stayed awake wondering what I had done wrong, only to realize I had done nothing wrong except trust the wrong person. And now here we were. She had built a life on top of me, using my loyalty like scaffolding. And when she thought the structure was stable enough, she kicked me aside. She forgot the most important rule. You don't destroy the foundation and expect the house to stand. Eventually, her sobs turned into quiet hiccups. I could see her slumped against the island, mascara streaked down her cheeks, staring at nothing. The phone still lay on the couch where she had thrown it hours earlier, buzzing occasionally with messages she didn't have the strength to answer. Part of me expected her to rally, to summon that sharp, manipulative side and come up with a counterattack. But sitting there, surrounded by the wreckage, she looked small, diminished. Not the towering figure who had once loomed over every part of my life. Just a person, flawed, scared, alone. I stood up from my chair and walked to the front door, stepping outside for the first time in hours. The evening air was cool against my skin, the sky darkening into a soft, bruised purple. I inhaled deeply, letting the fresh air fill my lungs, clearing out the last remnants of the man I used to be. Inside the house, Marissa was still crumbling. Outside, I was already rebuilding. Not with her. Not for her. For me. It was never just about Marissa. That's the part no one understood. Not her. Not her family. Not even some of the people closest to me. They thought I was acting out of spite. That this was about a bruised ego or getting back at the woman who humiliated me. But they didn't know the whole story. They didn't see the years of erosion, slow, quiet, merciless, that came not from one betrayal, but from 1,000 cuts. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. Reclaiming everything she tried to strip from me. My dignity, my confidence, my sense of worth. Things that had been buried under layers of manipulation, sarcasm disguised as banter, and silence where love used to live. I didn't fall into this overnight. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to burn everything down. I had been rebuilding in secret for a long, long time. It started with small choices. Unassuming ones. Saying no instead of nodding. Making space in the garage for my own projects. Reading books I'd hidden away for years. Taking walks alone without checking in. Every step gave me back a piece of myself. Every decision added weight to the man I was becoming again. Then came the larger moves. The ones that took planning. Precision. Patience. Archer Wren wasn't just my lawyer, he was my friend. We met back in college, back when I still believed that love meant sacrificing everything. He had been at the wedding, even helped me pick the cufflinks Marissa would later say looked too humble. Archer watched the years wear me down, but never pushed. He waited until I came to him, until I asked the hard questions. How do I protect myself? What would it take to walk away clean? He didn't give me pep talks. He gave me plans. He introduced me to Mateo Sinclair next, another old college friend, though I hadn't seen him in almost a decade. Back in school, Mateo was the loud one, the charming risk-taker with wild business ideas and a laptop full of code. He'd gone on to build a tech consulting firm, wildly successful, always under the radar. And I'd been one of the silent investors he never forgot. When I reached out, Mateo didn't ask questions. He offered opportunity, a seat at a new table, quiet ownership of a firm position to make strategic acquisitions, including, eventually, the parent company that Marissa's firm answered to. It was Mateo who set up the first introductions, Archer who handled the paperwork. Me? I did what I always did, stayed quiet, stayed invisible, stayed underestimated. That was the secret. Marissa and her world never saw me coming. Simon Keene was the kind of man who only learned to speak by hearing himself talk. He didn't just overlook me, he dismissed me entirely. At company parties, he would throw an arm around my shoulder, glass of scotch in hand, and ask if I was still doing that home project thing. Like I was some well-fed hobbyist kept afloat by his high-performing executive. He never imagined I'd become the man signing his checks. The day we closed the acquisition, I didn't even attend the final meeting. Mateo did. Archer was there too. I watched the handshake happen over a secure video link while sipping coffee in my kitchen. No fanfare. No fireworks. Just business. That's the thing about real power. It's quiet. Measured. Effective. Once the acquisition was finalized, the next phase began. The documents we sent to Simon, the files detailing Marissa's misconduct, weren't just a strategic bomb. They were a reflection of everything I had endured. Every falsified report, every silenced complaint she'd buried with charm and intimidation. It wasn't about destroying her. It was about exposing the lies she'd built her success on. And it worked. The fallout spread like wildfire. Not just through her company, but through the wider industry. The whispers began. Was it true? Did she really do all that? How did no one catch this earlier? I didn't answer any of them. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. But the real shift, the deeper one, was internal. I no longer flinched when people looked at me. I no longer apologized for taking up space, for speaking plainly, for having ambition. I remembered what it felt like to have purpose again, to stand on ground that wasn't shifting under someone else's weight. The friends who stuck around during the dark times, the ones who never judged, never asked why I stayed so long, they were still with me. And now, they saw me rise. Not with fanfare or ego, but with quiet certainty. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was building something that didn't require it. Marissa, meanwhile, was still spiraling. Her texts had grown erratic. Apologetic one minute, accusatory the next. We were partners, she wrote. How could you just abandon everything we had? The irony was suffocating. She never realized that I had been abandoned years ago, not in action, but in heart. She had stopped being my partner long before I stopped being her husband. Now, I was the man she never imagined I'd become. The one she tried to keep small. The one who learned to play the long game. Every smug glance she'd ever thrown, every time she scoffed at my ideas, every dismissive laugh across a crowded dinner party, they all had a cost. And she was finally paying the bill. This wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. And I was done living in deficit. The texts started changing tone around midnight. At first, they were just frantic little flashes, desperate pings lighting up my phone screen like dying fireflies. I'm sorry. Please, let's just talk. I made a mistake. I can fix this. I turned my phone face down on the nightstand and let them pile up, unread, like leaves gathering in a forgotten street. By morning, the messages had evolved from pleading to bargaining. Promises she couldn't keep, hopes she didn't deserve. We can get through this. We're stronger than this. I still love you. You're still my husband. That means something, right? Funny how the words that once could have broken me now barely scratched the surface. I sat on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise stretch across the city skyline. It painted the world in hues of gold and orange, crisp and clean, as if daring me to believe in new beginnings. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was simply done. It wasn't just Marissa trying to claw her way back into my life. Her family started too. Texts from her mother, her sister, even her father. The same people who once toasted her success with gleaming glasses and called me the luckiest man alive, like it was a consolation prize. She's been through a lot, her mother wrote. She needs you. Her father was less sentimental. Man up and fix this before you destroy your marriage. I laughed when I read that one. A short, humorless sound that echoed around the empty living room. Destroy the marriage? That bridge had burned long before I ever picked up the match. They didn't understand. They saw the headlines, the scandal, the whispers around town, and thought the worst thing Marissa had lost was her career. They thought the real tragedy was the fall from grace. They couldn't comprehend the real loss, trust, partnership, the kind of love that doesn't need applause to feel real. That was gone, and nothing could resurrect it. The days blurred together, each one a fresh layer of desperation added to the pile. Marissa's texts grew longer, more erratic. Late-night calls I let ring into silence. Voicemails that started with her crying and ended with her screaming. "You're heartless," she spat in one message. "You're not the man I married." She was right. I wasn't. The man she married would have forgiven her, would have folded himself in half trying to fix things, would have accepted the blame just to keep the peace. That man was dead, buried under years of belittling comments, silent resentments, and the slow, systematic erosion of self-worth. The man who stood in his place now was different, stronger, wiser, unbreakable. Marissa tried every tactic. Nostalgia, guilt, seduction, anger. She sent old photos, texted memories she thought would crack my armor. "Remember our trip to Napa? Remember our first apartment? How happy we were?" She painted our past in golden light, hoping I'd forget the shadows she cast over it. But memory is a tricky thing. It doesn't just recall the good. It drags up everything. The fights disguised as jokes, the lonely nights spent 2 feet apart but worlds away, the way she would weaponize silence when words didn't cut deep enough. I remembered it all. And the good parts? They weren't enough anymore. They couldn't erase the rot underneath. Her friends, once a swirling, laughing entourage around her, fell eerily silent. No more group chats buzzing with validation. No more likes on her curated social media posts. Silence replaced adoration, and Marissa wasn't built to survive in silence. The loneliness hit her like a slow-moving train, inevitable and crushing. One afternoon, after ignoring a dozen more calls, I caught a glimpse of her outside the building. She sat in her car across the street, sunglasses on, face hidden behind the tinted glass. Watching, waiting, hoping. I didn't confront her. I didn't even acknowledge her. I simply walked past, my spine straight, my heart steady. A silent message she couldn't misinterpret. I wasn't hers to command anymore. That evening, a final message arrived. "I don't know who I am without you." For a moment, just a moment, I felt the ghost of something old stir inside me. Pity, maybe. Regret. But it flickered out just as quickly as it came. Because the truth was, she never wanted me. She wanted the version of me she could control. She wanted a mirror that reflected her own success back at her, not a partner who dared to dream his own dreams. As she unraveled, the reality set in deeper and deeper. I wasn't coming back to fix anything. This wasn't a break. This wasn't a rough patch. This was the end. And for the first time in years, the end didn't terrify me. It liberated me. I wasn't the man begging for scraps of affection anymore. I wasn't the fool waiting at the door for a love that had long since curdled. I was the man who knew his worth. The man who had walked through fire and come out the other side with scars he wore like armor. Marissa's desperation wasn't my burden to carry. Not anymore. I finished my coffee, set the empty cup down on the balcony rail, and leaned back in my chair as the sun dipped below the horizon. Another day closing. Another piece of the past shedding itself from my skin. I wasn't running from her. I was walking toward myself. And I wasn't looking back. Marissa didn't go quietly. Of course she didn't. She fought the divorce with the same ferocity she once used to climb the corporate ladder, clawing, spinning half-truths into sob stories, twisting every small detail into some kind of injustice against her. Her attorney filed motion after motion, contesting everything from property division to spousal support, trying to paint her as the wounded party. But what Marissa never understood, what she couldn't understand, was that I hadn't entered this battle blind. I had spent months, maybe years if I was honest, quietly gathering the armor I would need for this exact war. Every careless word she uttered, every lie she scribbled onto financial documents, every instance of marital misconduct, all of it documented, notarized, archived. She had lived so high above consequences for so long that she forgot the ground still existed. The first hearing was brutal. For her, not for me. She arrived draped in black, like a widow mourning a life stolen from her. Her makeup was heavier than usual, eyes ringed in dark liner to sell the image of suffering. She clutched tissues in one hand like props she was ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Her lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit, leaned over and whispered theatrically in her ear every few minutes, as if coaching a witness about to take the stand. I sat quietly at my table, my lawyer, Archer Wren, beside me, calm and collected. I didn't need theatrics. I had facts. When the judge asked Marissa's attorney for evidence to support her financial claims, they stumbled. The numbers didn't add up. Documents contradicted themselves. In her desperation, Marissa had fabricated claims she couldn't back up, hoping emotion would outweigh truth. It didn't. Then came the evidence Archer and I had prepared: bank statements showing her private purchases disguised as business expenses, emails where she admitted to hiding money, recordings where she joked to friends about keeping the loser in the dark. It was all there, laid bare under the fluorescent lights of the courtroom. Marissa cracked before my eyes. First, her shoulders stiffened. Then her hand clutched the tissue tighter, shredding it without even realizing. Finally, when Archer played the voicemail, one she had left during a drunken girls' night, mocking me for trusting her with the finances, her composure broke entirely. She gasped, loud and shrill, standing up as if sheer outrage could erase the truth playing over the speakers. The judge's gavel came down hard. "Sit down, Mrs. Holt." Her lawyer put a hand on her arm, trying to ground her, but it was too late. Everyone saw it. The cracks in the polished exterior. The truth she couldn't outrun anymore. When the final ruling came weeks later, it was swift and devastating. The house remained mine, held safely in the trust. The joint investment she assumed she could siphon from, locked beyond her reach. The accounts she thought she could drain during the proceedings had been sealed months earlier. All her counterclaims, dismissed. She was left with nothing but the debt she had racked up under our shared name, debt I had proved she accrued without my consent. As the judge read the final orders, Marissa sat stone still, her face frozen in a mask of disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. In her mind, she was the victor, the survivor. The one who left people, not the one left behind. She had underestimated me so thoroughly, so absolutely, that even now, with the gavel struck and the papers signed, she couldn't comprehend how she had lost. I gathered my things quietly, the same way I had built this life in the shadows she never bothered to look into. As I stood to leave, Archer slid a small box across the table toward me, his eyes glinting with a rare flicker of amusement. The box was nondescript, plain, cardboard, taped hastily at the seams. Inside it was everything Marissa had been allowed to keep from our shared life, a handful of trinkets she hadn't even remembered to claim, a pair of sunglasses, a set of monogram towels from our second anniversary, and on top, perfectly folded, was the t-shirt, loser of the house, the same one she had gleefully handed me the night my marriage truly died. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the shirt resting innocently in the box. I could almost hear her laughter, sharp and careless, floating back from that night. The room spinning with champagne and self-congratulation. The moment she thought she had finally cemented her superiority over me. Funny how things change. I didn't take the box with me. I didn't need it. I left it sitting on the courthouse bench, where it belonged. Abandoned and meaningless, just like the life she had tried to build on my broken back. Outside, the afternoon sun hit my face, warm and blinding. I blinked into the brightness, breathing in the sharp, clean air like a man stepping out of a long, suffocating tunnel. The courthouse behind me felt smaller somehow, shrinking into the background as I moved forward. Marissa remained inside, alone, defeated, clinging to scraps she had once thrown away without a second thought. I didn't feel victorious. It wasn't that kind of moment. There were no fist pumps, no triumphal music swelling in the background. What I felt was lighter, like someone who had been carrying a heavy stone up a mountain for years and had finally reached the summit, not to claim it, but to let the stone go and watch it tumble away into the void below. The past was ashes now, and I had no interest in sifting through them. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse, coffee in hand, watching the city stretch before me like an endless canvas. The skyline was alive, glittering, breathing. It wasn't just a view, it was a reminder that freedom didn't come from grand gestures or flashy declarations. It came from quiet, stubborn persistence, from reclaiming pieces of yourself, one breath at a time. The business I had built, quietly, methodically, while Marissa had been chasing promotions and applause, thrived now. It was a machine fueled by every moment I had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. I didn't need a company newsletter or a fancy corner office to validate my success. My wins didn't require an audience anymore. They were real, tangible, built on foundations Marissa had never bothered to see. The friends I kept close now were different too. Mateo Sinclair, Archer Wren, A few others who had stuck by me not because they needed something, but because they saw me even when I wasn't trying to impress anyone. The kind of friendships that didn't dissolve when scandal touched the edges of your life. The kind that stayed. I sipped my coffee and thought about love. People asked, of course. Friends, family, even strangers at networking events, their voices low and curious. Seeing anyone yet? Back on the market? I would smile, polite but non-committal, and say something about focusing on myself right now. It wasn't that I was closed off to love. Not exactly. But love, real love, the kind that doesn't have conditions buried under compliments or loyalty traded for status, felt sacred now. It deserved patience. Respect. It deserved the version of me who had walked through fire and come out better, not bitter. Maybe someday, but not today. Today was for breathing. For feeling the weightlessness of a life I had rebuilt with my own hands. For standing on my own 2 feet, no strings attached, no apologies necessary. There were moments, brief and flickering, when ghosts of the past brushed against the edges of my mind. A smell, a song, a familiar street corner. Memories, good and bad, would surface without warning. I didn't fight them. I let them pass through me like waves, knowing they didn't have power over me anymore. Marissa's name still popped up occasionally in conversations I wasn't part of. Whispers about her new job, smaller, less glamorous. Hushed rumors about the debt she was still drowning under. People speculating if she would bounce back, if she would find herself again. I never joined in. I didn't need to. She was part of a closed chapter. A finished book. I had no interest in rereading it. I turned from the balcony and walked inside. The penthouse was bright, open, filled with things I had chosen deliberately. The reclaimed wood dining table I built myself, the leather armchair that molded perfectly to my body, the framed photographs of places I had visited alone, breathing in freedom like oxygen. Nothing was there to impress anyone else. It was mine, every inch of it, a reflection of a life lived on my own terms. The walls weren't covered in awards or achievements. I didn't need trophies anymore. I had something better. Peace. I spent my days differently now. Mornings were for long walks through the city, stopping into quiet coffee shops or bookstores tucked between skyscrapers. Afternoons were for work, building partnerships, mentoring young entrepreneurs who reminded me of the man I used to be, hungry and overlooked. Evenings were for simple joys, a good book, a home-cooked meal, the soft hum of music filling the space between solitude and serenity. And nights? Nights were for dreaming again. Not the frantic, desperate dreams of a man trying to prove something, but the soft, steady dreams of a man who knew who he was and didn't need anyone's permission to exist. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I was living. There was a strength in that I had never understood before. A kind of quiet invincibility that came from surviving without bitterness, from refusing to let betrayal define you. I had learned that healing didn't mean pretending it hadn't hurt. It meant acknowledging the scars and realizing they were proof not of weakness, but of endurance. Marissa once called me the loser of the house. Maybe she really believed it back then. But standing there, coffee cooling in my hand, the city pulsing below me, I realized she had never seen me at all. She had seen what she wanted to see, a placeholder, a trophy, a safe bet. Not the man who could rebuild an entire life from the ashes she left behind. Not the architect of his own victory. I set the coffee down and walked through my home, the floors cool against my bare feet. I paused by the window that overlooked the river, the sunlight glinting off the water like scattered diamonds. There was no parade celebrating this life I had built. No standing ovation. Just the steady beat of my heart and the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. No longer defined by the house or the marriage or the title someone else slapped on me in a moment of cruelty. I was my own man now. And in my new life, there was no room for anything less. The package arrived on a rainy afternoon, tucked between bills and an overpriced catalog I never subscribed to. No return address. Just my name in careful script on the front of a plain brown box. The kind of thing you almost ignore. Almost throw away. But something about the handwriting gave me pause. I stood in the foyer for a moment, rain dripping off my coat, the sound of the city dulled behind the thick glass of the penthouse windows. I carried the box to the kitchen and opened it with a steak knife, careful, slow. Inside, folded with eerie precision, was the t-shirt. The loser of the house. And beneath it, a handwritten note, pinned in the same deliberate script. You were never the loser. I just couldn't see you. M. I stared at it for a long time. No fury rose in me. No heartbreak. Just stillness. like someone had rung a bell in an empty chapel and left before the echo faded. I reached into the box and held the shirt between my fingers, the cotton soft, worn. It still smelled faintly like her perfume, the scent of a woman who once stood tall in every room, who believed she was untouchable. There was a time when something like this would have torn me in two. A time when her acknowledgement, her regret, would have been a lifeline. But that time had passed. I walked to the fireplace, flipped the switch, and watched the flames crackle to life. No ceremony. No hesitation. I folded the shirt again, pressed it flat, and placed it into the fire. The cotton caught quickly. The bold black letters curled and blackened, then vanished in a wisp of smoke. I watched it burn until there was nothing left. No anger. No sadness. Only peace. That shirt had once been her punchline, a symbol of how little she saw me. How much she had convinced herself I was beneath her. It had lived in the drawer like a curse for months, and then, later, a reminder. And now? Now it was gone, turned to ash like every other illusion she ever held about me. The note, I kept. Not for nostalgia, not for meaning, but because it proved something I already knew. Even she saw it now. She knew she lost not because I was weak, but because I had been strong in silence. She played fast, loud, dirty. I played long, slow, and clean. And in the end, her empire was rubble. Mine stood taller than ever. Checkmate. I sat down by the window, watching the rain trace crooked paths down the glass, the city blurred behind it like a watercolor. The past 6 months hadn't just been recovery, they'd been revelation. Every part of my life now is deliberate, chosen, earned. The silence didn't scare me anymore. It nourished me. People talk about closure like it's some grand moment, a confrontation, a breakthrough, a final, searing goodbye. But sometimes closure is quieter than that. It's the silence after the storm. The way your heart doesn't race when their name flashes across your screen. The way you let go of the version of yourself who needed them to validate your worth. Marissa's message wasn't a door reopening. It was a final nail in the one I had already sealed shut. Whatever apology she offered, whatever guilt she carried, that was her burden, not mine. I didn't need her guilt. I didn't need her to see me. I had already seen myself. And that was enough. I thought back to the beginning, to the night of that party. The string quartet playing while I stood outside alone, fireworks bursting above a house I paid for but was never welcomed into. I remembered the t-shirt being tossed into my hands like a joke, the smirk on her face, the champagne glass clinking against the marble counter while she laughed with people who didn't even know my name. That was the night my marriage ended, but it was also the night something else began. The long game. The strategy. The awakening. People like Marissa lived for the next applause, the next promotion, the next shiny thing to dangle in front of an audience. But I learned that real strength didn't need applause. It didn't perform. It built. Quietly. Steadily. With precision. Marissa thought she was playing chess. But she was too busy showing off her queen to notice I was taking pawns, one by one, until the board was mine. And now? Now, I didn't need to win. I already had. Not just in court. Not just in the bank accounts and the assets and the headlines. But in my soul. I had rebuilt not just a life, but a self. A man who no longer chased people who made him feel small. A man who didn't beg to be seen, didn't shrink to fit someone else's spotlight. A man who knew his own worth so thoroughly, so fully, that not even regret could sway him. I rose from the chair, poured myself a drink, and toasted quietly to the room. To the loser of the house, I whispered, a smile curling at the edges of my mouth. And then I added, softly, reverently, to the man who outgrew it. The fire crackled, the rain poured, and the world outside carried on, unaware that somewhere, high above the streets, a man had claimed his final victory. With no rage, no cruelty, just clarity and peace. Oh,